Chapter 513. Shinwu Dynasty, Imperial Capital. Lei Chuxing paced back and forth in Yangxin Palace with his hands behind his back. He glanced around the empty palace with a gloomy face. The entire Yangxin Palace was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. Anyone who got close to the palace would find it hard to breathe. Lei Chuxing's plan had only begun to work now. After opening up the borders, the border army under his command retreated to the central plains. Although they might not be able to confront the Frost Mirror cavalry head-on, they could still defend the imperial city and the nearby cities. Before the war began, Lei Chuxing had already ensured his own safety. However, the northern frontier did not have such a good condition. The northern battlefront army was still in the north. Most of the soldiers in the southern battlefront army were new recruits. Even the old soldiers were just average. They were much weaker than the elite soldiers in the border army. The only force that could give him pressure was the fallen star army that Yan Xingqi had trained. But the number of soldiers was too small. In a large-scale battle where more than 1 million soldiers were involved, what could 5,000 soldiers do to him? Lei Chuxing could never imagine that any army in the northern frontier could fight the Shuangjin barbarians' main force head-on. Therefore, when he knew that the Shuangjin dynasty was approaching Donglin City, Lei Chuxing was so excited. He wanted the Shuangjin dynasty to charge in and destroy the entire northern frontier. Then, he could clean up the mess. However, the Shuangjin barbarians stopped. Their main forces didn't act like before, recklessly charging into the northern territories to burn, kill, and plunder. Instead, after encountering the southern expedition army that Lei Chuxing deemed to be unable to withstand a single blow, they suddenly stopped advancing. Both sides even began to communicate. If the Shuangjin dynasty reached a peace agreement with the northern frontier, it would be a terrible nightmare for him. After all, his trump card was still in the preparation stage. If the northern frontier lost the Shuangjin dynasty's restraint, not only would they be able to quickly annex the entire northern territory, they could even deploy a series of battle plans along the river, waiting for his army to smash their heads and bleed. That's right, his head was broken and bleeding. Although he felt that the army at the northern frontier was mediocre, they were from the Shinwu dynasty and not the Qingjiang dynasty, which had the best navy in the world. Letting his meticulously trained divine marshal heavy steps cross the Wei River to fight was equivalent to throwing iron cans into the Wei River. Who can tell me what the situation is in the north? Without Zhang Xiu, is your embroidered guard all trash? Lei Chuxing's gaze swept across the shadows of the Hall of Mental Cultivation as he roared angrily, "If I had known that the embroidered uniform guard was only at this level, I would have let the Servants Administration take over the Northern Intelligence Network. Do not challenge this monarch's patience. You must send me the latest intelligence on the North within 4 hours. Furthermore, all of this monarch's orders must be completed with the highest priority." "Yes. Understood. As you command." Several feeble voices rang out from the shadows. The embroidered uniform guard's intelligence network in the north had not been disbanded, but due to Lei Chuxing's suspicious nature, the original officers had all been purged and replaced, regardless of whether they were loyal to him or not. There was no lack of spies that he had personally placed by Zhang Xiu's side. Changing generals at the last minute was a huge taboo in the army. Coupled with Lei Chuxing's bloody purges, the entire embroidered uniform guard felt insecure. They couldn't even guarantee their own safety, so who would focus on gathering intelligence and establishing a spy network for him? Moreover, in this kind of intelligence network, there were often hundreds or thousands of spies lying dormant in a single command. Only by extending this network could a complete and mature intelligence network be formed. Zhang Xiu had transferred away a group of loyal higher-ups of the embroidered uniform guard, and Lei Chuxing had purged them himself. Currently, it was unknown how many spies were in contact with the embroidered uniform guard but didn't have official identities. After all, their command lines were already gone. Who could verify their identities? Under such circumstances, the current situation of the embroidered uniform guard wasn't as simple as just rotting away. It was even on the verge of collapse. Lei Chuxing still had delusions that the embroidered uniform guard could maintain the powerful operational capabilities that it had when Zhang Xiu was still in power. This was no different from a fool's dream. Of course, this kind of intelligence network was different from the military system. At the very least, the bloody purge of the higher-ups had shocked most people. There wouldn't be an army mutiny. As long as there was enough time, the embroidered uniform guard's original structure could definitely be restored. However, if he wanted to restore the all-pervasive scouting ability of the North, he would have to ask the Shifter Emperor Council and the embroidered uniform guard if they were willing to do so. Since you knew it would be so troublesome, why didn't you kill it back then? When I dealt with Zhang Xiu, I had the opportunity to kill it. It was just a matter of convenience. A black shadow flashed, and the shadow that was supposed to be overseeing the south slowly appeared behind Lei Chuxing. Lei Chuxing shook his head lightly and said bitterly, "The Black Jiao is indeed a difficult opponent, but it cannot die. At the very least, it cannot die now, and it cannot die at our hands." Oh. The shadow raised its eyebrows imperceptibly, as if it was curious about this statement. With the Black Jiao as the representative of the northern frontier, the Black Jiao has already set its sights on those top powers. Because of the previous incident, the Black Jiao has shown the ambition and ability to replace me. Those top powers are definitely begging for it. Otherwise, why do you think the chaos in the Xinwu dynasty has continued until now? Isn't it just those guys who are creating opportunities for the Black Jiao and stalling for time? In addition, the relationship behind the Black Jiao is also complicated. Forget about the ancient demon court, whose real identity is unknown. Anyway, it can establish a relationship with the top powers. Even if its identity is fabricated, it doesn't matter. However, its current identity is the Lord of the Northern Frontier and the Beast King of the Hengduan Mountains. It is also inextricably linked to those dragon blood demons. All the forces are trying to rope it in. If the Black Jiao dies at this time, not only will the Northern Frontier go out of control, but the Sea Demon Rebellion in the south and the Hengduan Mountains will also take revenge. Even the Frost Mirror Dynasty and the Qingjiang Dynasty will try to take a step further. Lei Chuxing put his hands behind his back, exhaled a turbid breath, and said in a cold voice, "The Black Jiao was born as a demon beast. This is its natural disadvantage. On the other hand, we are just people who killed our master and usurped the throne. We are not much stronger than it. The other 6 dynasties have been trying to find ways to balance the other forces for so many years. They will not tolerate a usurper like me to continue to exist." Got it. The shadow nodded slightly. He did not understand Lei Chuxing's thoughts, but as the shadow of Lei Chuxing, he only needed to obey the order. Chapter 5:14. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. A cold glint flashed across Lei Chuxing's eyes as he said, "Although the cultists' invasion into the south this time is unexpected, if we use it well, it will be of help. At least the blame won't be directly placed on us. That plan can be started. Once I have a definite order, release them immediately. The south isn't ready yet. Moreover, this is the reason why we fell out with the top powers this time. If we reveal our strength now, it'll be no different from drinking poison to quench our thirst. Although we can resolve the Frost dynasties and the North's problems, the top powers definitely won't tolerate us anymore. In fact, they might even interfere directly with this matter." The shadow took a deep breath and sighed. Moreover, the evil cult's life in the south is not good enough. They are not powerful enough. If we force them to be blamed, it will not be justifiable. There is no other way. Even if we don't want to fall out with those top forces, with their existence, we are no longer on the same side. It is only a matter of time before we fall out with them. Therefore, we don't need to hide anything from them. We just need to explain it to those who have not been in contact with this circle. It is not that I am greedy for power, but after all, the follow-up plan needs a lot of manpower and material resources to be implemented. The Shinwu dynasty can't be given up now. At least, we can't give up before we reach the first stage of the plan. Lei Chuxing shook his head gently and sighed. The Shuangjin barbarian now thinks that we are weak and can be bullied. Our previous plan not only failed to suppress the northern frontier, but also shot ourselves in the foot. Should we ask the border army to take action? The shadow looked serious. If there are too many Frost Mirror barbarian coming in this time, it will not be good for our recovery. We don't have to go all out. Ask the border army to expand the protection area. We have to protect at least half of the territory in the Central Plains. At the same time, open up a path for Frost Mirror's cavalry to go south. Although those guys are on our side, they are also hungry wolves. Without a large number of blood sacrifices to make them happy, even I can't tell what will happen. Lei Chuxing's lips curled up slightly as he sneered, not long after, the Shinwu dynasty will return to my rule. I can even swallow up half of the Shuangjin dynasty. After recuperating for a few years, I will turn around and swallow up the Qingjiang Empire. When that time comes, I will monopolize half of the world. Who can stop me? Yes. The shadow nodded slightly and disappeared into the shadows again. Although the scheme is good, it's a pity that there will be endless troubles in the future. Lei Chuxing put his hands behind his back and sighed. If I hadn't been prepared, the Black Jiao would have been in a general's position. Now, it's fine. The more people that come, the happier they will be. No one liked the feeling of being pressured step by step. Even Lei Chuxing, who had expected this to happen, felt the same way. How could he not know that it was not time for those things to be exposed? If he could use the Shuangjin barbarian to defeat the northern frontier, that would be the best plan. However, with the embroidered uniform guards being replaced and the ether collapsing, not only would the intelligence agencies in the north become dim, but even the intelligence agencies in the south would be dragged into the quagmire of war. In the huge Shinwu dynasty, the only thing that was under his control was the Central Plains, which was run by the shadow. Therefore, Lin Yuan had schemed under his nose and led a large number of cultists to the south. This was something that he had not expected at all. He had been prepared to use the Shuangjin barbarian as a feint, waiting for the northern frontier to be exhausted before mobilizing the border army to take back the northern territory in one fell swoop. Because of all these arrangements, he could not sit back and watch the south collapse into the hands of the cultists. He could only cooperate with Lin Yuan's rhythm and lead the Frost Mirror barbarian to the south, letting the barbarians fight with the interest groups in the south. In the hotbed of war, the cultists who preached that they were the representatives of the gods who saved the world would naturally find the best hotbed to grow their strength. Unless the barbarians used the power of the entire dynasty, they would not be able to eliminate the cultists with just a portion of the border army. The difference in strength between the two sides would rapidly shrink and then magnify. When the entire south fell apart, he would use the name of the cultists to release them. Then, he could send all those who held him back or did not listen to him to hell. When they were full, they would naturally be in a good mood. At that time, he would appear and communicate with them. Then, he would put on a show and drive them into the northern frontier or the territory of the Shuangjin dynasty. Not only would he be able to recover his territory, but he would also be able to completely reshuffle the cards and make the bloated dynasty his say in the future. What interest groups in the south? What northern frontier? In the eyes of Lei Chuxing, they were just a bunch of tools. Ever since he got in touch with them, his vision and structure had long surpassed his own level. Moreover, he had the special existence of the shadow at his disposal. Naturally, he would be successful in doing things secretly. This time, the four major forces joined forces to attack the Shinwu dynasty because some disobedient fellows among them were discovered. This matter attracted the attention of the top forces, and they asked Lei Chouxing to release all the restrictions and let them search. However, Lei Chouxing, who had a guilty conscience, was naturally unwilling to agree. Therefore, the drama of the four forces attacking one was born. Although the top forces didn't have any evidence, those people knew how terrifying they were. Not to mention seeing it, even if it was just a groundless rumor, they would quickly investigate the situation. If there were any signs of something wrong, they would directly kill them. If that fellow hadn't reacted quickly and retreated with them, there would be no survivors in the entire Shenwu dynasty now. According to the original script, Lei Chouxing would be the biggest loser, and Lin Yuan, Lei Chouxing, and even the combined forces of the aristocratic families, which were not as powerful as the northern frontier, would become the winners and begin to divide this fat cake. However, among these people who had already gained benefits, except for Lin Yuan, Lei Chouxing didn't have the intention to put the others in his eyes. His real opponents had always been those high and mighty top forces. At least, this was Lei Chouxing's plan at the moment. Moreover, the development of the matter was slowly moving in the direction he had envisioned. However, no matter whether it was the reaction of Lin Yuan or the top forces, Lei Chouxing was an uncontrollable variable. Even if he was lucky enough to make use of the evil cult members introduced by Lin Yuan to talk about the matter, in an attempt to delay the time for the top forces to intervene in this matter, there were several changes in the cards in Lin Yuan's hands that he couldn't figure out in any case. Chapter 5:15. On the Northern Plains. The Shuangjin dynasty's supply wagons had already set out for quite some distance. Even from the highest watchtower in Donglin City, one could only see a small shadow of the convoy. It wouldn't be long before the convoy completely disappeared from their sight and stepped into the undercurrent of the conflict between the three factions. "How should I address you, General?" Keizhuo urged his warhorse to catch up with Zhang Shuzhu, who was at the front of the group, and asked with a chuckle. Keizhuo preferred the 13th prince over the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen, but he knew very well that no matter which answer he chose, it was the same as choosing death. The only difference was that one would be executed immediately, while the other would be a delayed death. The only way he could find to survive was to find a way to stay on the northern frontier after this matter was over. If things didn't work out, then he would choose the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalrymen and hide in the northern territories for a period of time. He would return to the plains after the Bloodsill tribe had declined. Even if he lost everything he had now, it was still better than losing his life. At this moment, Keiting finally understood why the third prince had given him such a lucrative task, and why the people of the large tribes had mocked him. He hadn't thought much of it when he had received the generous gifts, but now it seemed that these fellows had clearly regarded him as a dead man. If he wanted to survive, he had to curry favor with the northern frontier by hook or by crook in exchange for a period of protection from the northern frontier or a permanent residence on the northern frontier. Because of her nervousness, she urgently needed someone to talk to. Secondly, Keizhuo's abilities lay in his cultivation and horseback. If he wanted to make a living after joining the northern frontier, he would have to walk the path of the army. Although Zhang Shuzhu wasn't conspicuous yet, someone who could gain the favor of Li Zhongxing would definitely have great achievements in the future. That was why he chattered so much in order to make himself known. It could be said that he had put a lot of thought into it. Zhang Shuzhu glanced at Keizhuo and rolled his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have a good impression of the Shuangjin barbarian to begin with. It was already good enough that he didn't draw his sword. Furthermore, Li Zhongxing had set him up as a reclusive person who didn't know how to speak the common language of the Tianwu continent. Under such circumstances, unless he had no other choice, he naturally wouldn't speak. Although these Shuangjin barbarian were already food in his mouth, he wouldn't disregard the big picture for a little personal grudge before he was completely confident. Moreover, it was obvious that Li Zhongxing had reminded him of an opportunity that could bring even greater losses to the barbarians. Why wouldn't Zhang Shuzhu do it? However, these Shuangjin barbarian couldn't all die in the ambush. At least 2 or 3 frost mirror barbarian had to be released before they could return to pass on the news that Li Zhongxing wanted the Shuangjin dynasty to know. The supply convoy had been ambushed by Shenlin Jun's reserve forces, and the convoy was almost completely wiped out. When the time came, Li Zhongxing would take the opportunity to remove the checkpoint and find a way to lead these Shuangjin barbarian to meet the real Shenlin Jun's reserve forces. Including the 500,000 frost mirror barbarian, whose fate was already sealed, Zhang Xiuzhu had to use his great willpower to suppress himself so that he wouldn't laugh out loud. This time, the 49 knights following Zhang Xiuzhu weren't professional soldiers from the northern frontier. Some of them were hired wanderers, and some were cultivators that the Shifter Emperors Association had recruited from the Mercenary Union and the Demon Subduing Masters Association. However, most of them were trained by Luo Su of the Embroidered Uniform Guard. In terms of cultivation, these 49 knights were not inferior to the carefully selected Frost Mirror cavalry generals. Moreover, their past experiences had given them a few more abilities than the Frost Mirror cavalry generals, who rarely moved around in the mountains. In terms of stealth, concealment, and tracking, even if the Frost Mirror cavalry generals had 10 times the number of them, they still wouldn't be able to compete with them in a battlefield that they were familiar with. Therefore, once the situation became chaotic, even if they ran into Shenlin Jun's reserve forces, about 80% of them could survive. If they were lucky, they might even be able to escape from the ambush site with a few survivors. However, Zhang Xiuzhu still needed time to come up with a general plan of action. Although some of the Frost Mirror cavalry generals had to return alive, who would live and who would die was still a matter of consideration. For example, Juechen, who was the messenger, would definitely take up one of the spots. The guy who was wearing an ordinary general's armor but was surrounded by several Frost Mirror cavalry generals probably had a powerful background as well. As for the rest of the spots, Zhang Xiuzhu would have to consider carefully. After all, although the idea of an ambush was proposed by the northern frontier, the scapegoat would definitely be the Shenlin Jun's reserve forces. Therefore, the more people from the Shuangjin dynasty survived, the more credible the rumor that Li Zhongxing spread would be. But similarly, if all the important people survived, and the ones who died were just cavalry generals, the Shuangjin dynasty would naturally become suspicious. They might even take this opportunity to launch a war directly to see the truth of the northern frontier. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu needed time and space to observe the situation and determine the status of the Frost Mirror cavalry generals so that he could decide who would survive. According to the plan, the ambushers should be Zhang Xiuzhu's own people who had seized equipment from Wei River City. However, for the sake of realism, once the two sides engaged in close combat, even their own people would not hold back. If they were unlucky or not strong enough, they would die in vain. War had always been this cruel. Moreover, no one knew when the ambush would begin. Therefore, Zhang Xiuzhu's team leader had to arrange everything properly before the ambush happened. For example, he had to arrange at least 3 or 4 people around the valuable Frost Mirror barbarian. Once the battle started and the situation was not good, they would immediately cover the enemy's retreat. After all, they were all on the same side. Once the battlefield was divided, the brothers would not die even if they were captured. In order to ensure the implementation of the plan, Zhang Xiuzhu had even prepared a plan to completely wipe out. Fortunately, the people he brought with him were all elites. They did not have any combat strength or reaction time problems. As long as Zhang Xiuzhu gave the order, or if things deviated from his expectations, they would be able to react immediately. For a scholarly general like Zhang Xiuzhu, he only needed to be a wise man. Naturally, they would carry out the plan in a way that maximized their benefits. It was just that with Keizhuo constantly chattering in his ear, not to mention that Zhang Xiuzhu's heart-nurturing kung fu had not yet reached the great accomplishment stage, even if he could reach the stage of being indifferent, it would still be difficult for him to ignore Keizhuo, who was like a fly. Helplessly, he could only give an officer next to him a look. Chapter 5:16. The latter immediately understood and welcomed him with a smile. Young clan leader, please don't make things difficult for our team leader. He's still familiar with this area and we still need him to lead the way. If he gets distracted and takes the wrong path into the deep mountains and forests, we'll all become food for the demonic beasts. Besides, our leader doesn't speak the common language. We're the only ones who can communicate with him. If you have anything to say, why don't you tell me? I'll pass it on to both sides later. The officer quickly pulled Kai-Ting away from Zhang Shuzhu with a warm smile on his face. Never in his wildest dreams would Kai-Ting have imagined that this smiling fellow was actually one of the famous torturers of the Imperial Secret Service. Who knew how many skins he had personally peeled off, not to mention how proficient he was in other cruel methods of torture. But just this smile alone made Kai-Ting, whose heart was in turmoil, feel a deep sense of security. At this moment, the two of them were undoubtedly chatting happily, as if they were close friends who were talking and laughing as they walked further and further away. Zhang Xiaozhu looked at the backs of the two people as they disappeared into the distance. Then, he faintly sighed and said in his heart, "Why don't I just kill them? It's so annoying to always have a fly by my side." The group advanced for another 4 hours. They were less than half an hour away from the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment. However, Zhang Shuzhu, who was at the front of the group, suddenly raised his right hand. In that instant, whether it was the cavalry or the supply troops, they all stopped in their tracks and carefully drew their weapons. The Frost Mirror Cavalry, who was already suspicious of these northern frontier people, was shocked. They also drew their weapons. But the targets of the two sides were completely different. The northern frontier people were guarding the dense forest in front of them, while the Frost Mirror Cavalry were guarding against these people from the northern frontier. After a few breaths, the Frost Mirror Cavalry realized that the people from the northern frontier people weren't targeting them. But even though they were embarrassed, they didn't put down their weapons. They were still on high alert, as if they were worried that the people from the northern frontier people were putting on a show. They were waiting for them to lower their guard before attacking. "General, may I ask what's going on?" Kai-Ting whispered to a few of his trusted generals. Then, he rode to the front of the formation to ask about the situation. "There are no beasts in the forest. Even a startled bird wouldn't fall. What do you think is going on?" Zhang Xiaozhu glanced at Kai-Ting and said something in code, which the genial officer passed on to Kai-Ting. According to the original plan, there would be an ambush on the way. But the location of the ambush surprised Zhang Xiaozhu. This place was only a few minutes away from the Shuangjian dynasty's military camp. As long as they passed through this dense forest, they would enter the open plains. Then, they would arrive at the place where the Frost Mirror Cavalry was gathered. If the commander of the Divine Forest Guard wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't have set up an ambush in such a place. After all, if the commotion caused by the battle had attracted the attention of the Frost Mirror Cavalry, these starving fellows would quickly realize that there were no armed forces from the northern region in this dense forest that blocked their path of retreat. It was just a little more troublesome to travel. After passing through this forest, they would be able to reach Eastwood City, and then return to the Frost Mirror Plains through the main road there. Letting the Frost Mirror Cavalry see a way out was a small matter. After all, most of the troops in the Northern Territory had gathered here, and the encampment wasn't too far away. If the Frost Mirror Cavalry gave up on their mobility and entered the forest, they would lose at least 40% of their men before they could make it to the other end of the forest. Furthermore, there was a group of troops from the Southern Army blocking their path. When the pursuers met up with the Southern Expedition, they would be able to surround the Frost Mirror Cavalry and take them down. The only thing they had to be careful about was that if the two groups of Frost Mirror Cavalry encountered each other, they could use their mobility advantage to surround the Frost Mirror Cavalry. It was hard to say whether the Frost Mirror Cavalry would be surrounded by the Northern Frontier or the Southern Expedition. Therefore, the ambush in front of them either had the confidence to take them down in an instant, or it was really an ambush. Moreover, it was an ambush that didn't know the current situation. Of course, the ambush wasn't the obedient rebel army of the aristocratic families punished by Li Zhongxing in the north. It was the real Shenlin Jun's reserve force. Although these guys ran out of Wei River City, they didn't take any supplies with them except for their armor and weapons. If it wasn't for the food stored in the underground tunnel, many of the hundreds of thousands of people would have starved to death. In any case, this show was most likely real. The camouflage troops had either been eliminated, or were waiting for their prey in a further place, or they had been set up by Li Zhongxing on their way back. It was just that this ambush was a little too amateurish. Not only did they clear the entire forest of wild beasts, they didn't even chase away the birds above them. Anyone who didn't know anything about the art of war or didn't pay attention to the details would definitely choose to go around this forest and choose another path. Were these guys really the elite Shenlin Jun's reserve force? Zhang Xiaozhu reached out and patted his forehead. His face was gloomy as he raised his right hand and gently pressed it forward twice. According to the organization of the northern region, a heavy wagon was equipped with 4 civilian laborers and 2 auxiliary soldiers whose fighting strength was not as good as the frontline troops. However, Li Zhongxing had long replaced the civilian laborers and the auxiliary soldiers with the good soldiers of the Southern Expedition Army who did not look like much. Now they had 85 generals with good fighting strength and 1,200 elite soldiers at their disposal. It sounded good, but if they really encountered the hundreds of thousands of Shenlin Jun's reserve force, it would be no different from delivering food to them. In fact, without the protection of seniors like the Fallen Star Army, Zhang Xiaozhu felt that even if they encountered a group of defeated soldiers, even if the difference in numbers between the two sides wasn't that big, their chances of winning were really low. After all, the ordinary soldiers of Shenlin Jun's reserve force were basically equal to most of the Frost warriors on the battlefield. The Northern Frontier's reserve force might have more elite soldiers, but the difference wasn't that big. As for the combat strength of those elite soldiers, in a battle of this level, it was almost negligible. Fortunately, not many people noticed that something was wrong. Following Zhang Xiaozhu's order, a group of 10 elite soldiers instantly broke away from the formation and entered the dense forest in front of them with swords and shields in their hands. Soon, they were blocked by the dense weeds and tree trunks. Zhang Xiaozhu turned his horse slightly, closed his eyes slightly, and began to count silently, 1, 2, 3. Chapter 5:17. 15 breaths. Zhang Xiaozhu's eyes suddenly widened. He raised his right hand and made a fist. The elite soldiers who received the order immediately overturned the supply wagons beside them. They used these not-so-sturdy wooden wagons to build a temporary and simple fortification. Then, they raised their swords and shields and hid behind the supply wagons. Zhang Xiaozhu and his brothers also dismounted and retreated to the back of the fortifications. Clearly, the Mount Frost generals weren't too happy about this. After all, they spent most of their time on horseback. If they dismounted and fought these northern frontier soldiers on foot, they wouldn't even be able to last one round. They wouldn't even have the chance to escape. On the other hand, Kei Ting, who had been whispering into Zhang Xiaozhu's ear, jumped down from her horse and hid behind the fortifications. Many Mount Frost generals rolled their eyes at her. Whoosh! 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 Before the Judgment Frost cavalry could reprimand them, the sharp sound of something tearing through the air rang out. Before the 34 Frost Mirror Riders could react, 11 of them were shot down by the volley of arrows. The rest of them also had a few arrows stuck in their bodies. Although the arrows weren't fatal for a short period of time, they still affected their mobility. This volley of arrows had basically crippled half of the Frost Mirror Riders' combat strength. As for Zhang Xiaozhu and his party, who had long anticipated this, they were practically unscathed. Most of the arrows were nailed to the supply wagons, while a small number of arrows were blocked by the shields. Of course, there were a few unlucky fellows who were still hit by the arrows. Those who were slightly luckier were shot in the arms and calves, which affected their combat strength but wasn't fatal. Those who were unlucky had their heads cleanly shot by an arrow. This time, Zhang Xiuzhu and the others didn't need to waste any more words. The remaining Frost Mirror cavalry immediately dismounted from their horses, which they viewed as their lover, and scrambled into the fortifications of the supply wagons. They began to wail like ghosts and howl like wolves. The Mirror Frost dynasty only had two battle styles. The first was to use cavalry and archers to harass the enemy while slowly trailing behind them. The second was to directly charge forward with the army. They didn't care about losses and only wanted to engage in close combat with the enemy. Of course, aside from the boorish ones, the Mirror Frost generals who could make the latter battle strategy were basically all confident that they would win. Who are these guys? Kei Teng was trembling all over. His teeth chattered as he spoke. It was so loud that one would worry that he would bite his tongue. Zhang Xiuzhu's lips curled up. A bitter smile appeared on his face. He ordered in code, "Repair the fortification. Move the extra supply wagons to the front. We will wait for 1 or 2 more rounds of attack to see how strong the enemy is." To put it bluntly, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Everyone knew that during the time of the Wanjian dynasty, Lei Qiusheng, Yan Xingqi, and their personal guards were all elites in the world and were equally matched. In Lei Qiusheng's dynasty, after a few decades of development, the Divine Forest Army had become the #1 army in the Xinwu dynasty with the title of the world's #1 step, becoming a legend among legends. However, everyone in the northern frontier felt that Lei Qiusheng's era was about to end. A new era that belonged to Lin Yuan was about to begin. Shenlin Jun, the world's #1 heavy infantry, should have retired from the stage. Who would become the first army in the northern frontier? This was the long-cherished wish of almost every soldier in the northern frontier. They had the northern frontier to defend, the southern frontier to attack, and the experienced and ruthless Starfall. There were also the graduates of the Star General class that Lin Yuan personally led. It was said that they had formed a secret special unit that had yet to be officially revealed. The scale of the southern expedition was too large. Sooner or later, different units would be assigned to different territories. Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to work hard with Donglin City as his goal. Although his real opponent was the Shuangjian dynasty, this didn't stop Zhang Xiuzhu from having the idea of personally training his own troops as the northern frontier's #1 army. Most of the people in front of him now were Shenlin Jun's reserves. If he didn't even have the guts to challenge the reserves, how could Zhang Xiuzhu still have the face to compete for the title of the northern frontier's #1 army? Even if his troops did become the strongest army in the northern frontier in the future, his concession to Shenlin Jun's reserves today would fiercely nail him to the pillar of shame. Even if he obtained that title, he wouldn't dare to openly show it. Although most of the people present were not Zhang Xiuzhu's subordinates, they were at the top of the southern expedition's food chain. Naturally, they wouldn't have the idea of directly retreating after hearing the other party's name. Now that Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to stay and fight with the other party, for them, it was something they couldn't ask for more. The other party shouldn't have a lot of people. They are just a defeated army. Zhang Xiuzhu slightly raised his eyebrows and sneered, "Although the ambush technique is lame, if it weren't for our quick reaction, they could have leisurely come up and killed us one by one. This level of attack isn't something that can be done by just anyone, so their identity is correct. The only thing that is wrong is the number of people." "You mean?" Officer Gung quickly took over the conversation, squinted his eyes and said, "The other party deliberately covered up their marching tracks and scattered in the territory of the northern frontier. They just want us to focus on their original marching route." But in fact, the people who are still marching along their original marching route are almost all abandoned pawns. Zhang Xiuzhu nodded slightly and continued, "Also, if they have enough people, they should have come up to fight us at close range after seeing that we have finished building the fortifications and exposed their existence with the rain of arrows. But they haven't done anything yet. I I think they are either the allies of the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalry, or they don't have enough people and don't have the confidence to fight us at close range. The rain of arrows just now came suddenly and uniformly. Zhang Shuzhu only heard the loud sound of bowstrings being released. Obviously, these people had drawn their bows, pulled their strings, and released their bows at almost the same time, so the countless sounds converged into one loud sound. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. But Zhang Shuzhu's command was good, and his subordinates reacted quickly. Even building the fortifications with local materials was only a matter of seconds. This was not something that an ordinary army could do. So even if the other party was Shenlin Jun's reserve force, they had no choice but to take Zhang Shuzhu's army seriously. Chapter 5:18. Both sides have about the same number of people. We still don't know who will kill who. Geng Su was obviously not someone who was afraid of trouble. He immediately sneered, "How about we organize a counterattack? If they don't want to come out of the forest, we will rush in and play with them." Geng Su was a member of the Genie Guards. He was Yu Dingchen, the one who received the order from Li Zhong. After delivering Li Zhong's handwritten document to Li Zhongxing, Yu Dingchen didn't immediately return to the safe Shunning City. Instead, he chose to stay at the front line to help the southern expedition. Although the ones sent to occupy the source of Wei River were a few subdivisions of the southern expedition, it didn't mean that the main force didn't lack manpower. Based on the current tragic degree of one army against a country, Li Zhongxing's troops had to be at least 3 times more than before to have the capital to be strong. Zhang Shuzhu gently shook his head and sighed. No matter what, the other side is the world's elite Shenlin Jun. Even if they are in the reserve force, they are not much weaker than us. If we rush in and fight with them, it won't be called a war. Speaking of this, Zhang Shuzhuan paused and smiled bitterly. It's called delivering food. Yu Dingchen, who was originally calmed down by Zhang Shuzhu, suddenly changed his expression. Even the hot blood in his chest cooled down a lot. Whether he admitted it or not, Zhang Shuzhu's judgment was correct. After all, since ancient times, soldiers fought soldiers, generals fought generals. No one would give up the identity of a purple-level general to kill a small group of soldiers. In this case, the elite soldiers of the northern frontier were obviously not inferior to anyone. But only Shenlin Jun was outside of common sense. This army that was firmly controlled by Lei Chuxing recruited new soldiers every year. They were not selecting soldiers at all. Instead, they were selecting people who had the qualifications to become generals and bringing them back to Wei River City for training. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Shenlin Jun's reserve force was all generals. Not to mention their army, looking at the entire northern frontier, except for the 5,000-star fallen army, there was probably only the secret army formed by the star class that could win against Shenlin Jun's reserve force. After all, Shenlin Jun was selecting generals, but the star class selection of recruits was almost like selecting monsters. Zhang Shuzhu, a scholarly general, could be regarded as a confidant and successor by Li Zhongxing after meeting Li Zhongxing face to face. Naturally, he had the ability. And he was only qualified to be invited to the star class for an interview. If he rejected it, then so be it. It was as if Lin Yuan had never cared about him. Although Li Zhongxing had the title of Southern Expedition General, in fact, he had only been brought out of Shenlin Jun's reserve force for a little more than a year. However, this did not mean that Li Zhongxing was a newcomer to the battlefield. On the contrary, with Luo Su's teaching and the process of fighting against various aristocratic families in the north, Li Zhongxing's growth speed could be said to be leaps and bounds. He quickly implemented the knowledge that he had learned in Wei River City. The current Li Zhongxing could not be said to be a famous general who could move unhindered in the world, but his level was not inferior to veteran generals who had fought hundreds of battles on the battlefield. Just based on this point, one could tell what kind of monsters were in the star class, not to mention those talented generals that Lin Yuan had focused on recruiting. Any one of them, after training for a period of time and turning their theoretical knowledge into experience, could be an existence that could lead a large army by themselves. We can't beat them, but that doesn't mean that I can't deal with them. My soldiers. Zhang Shuzhu leaned against the fortifications and roared in a low voice. The elite soldiers around instantly cast their gazes over. Zhang Shuzhu smiled and nodded, saying, "What you faced just now was not the aristocratic family's rebel army, not the roaming bandits of the forest, but the divine martial heavy steps, Shenlin Jun." Speaking up to this point, Zhang Shuzhu paused, and said with a bit of ridicule, "Of course, it's the reserve force. As the saying goes, a person's name is like a tree's shadow." Shenlin Jun's name was well known throughout the world. Even the people of the northern frontier had heard of this invincible army that gathered the leaders of the Shenwu dynasty. If they were told that the ambush was Shenlin Jun, even if these elite soldiers had a strong sense of bravery in their hearts, they would not do something that would send them to their deaths. However, Zhang Shuzhu pointed out that the other party was a reserve force, and even used a ridiculing tone to speak, which immediately drove away the nervousness in the hearts of many people. After the surrounding atmosphere calmed down a little, Zhang Shuzhu continued, "Of course, Shenlin Jun has been an army for decades, and the requirements for recruiting soldiers are basically the king of soldiers or the talented orphans of the battlefield. However, my southern expedition has been an official army for less than half a year. Asking you to go and risk your lives is a bit too much." The corner of Yu Dingchen's mouth twitched crazily. Listening to the continuous roaring laughter, he felt that his whole body was not good. Is there anyone who can boost morale like this? Just come up and tell your own soldiers that you can't beat them at all. Then why are you still here? Isn't it better to escape early? But it's not that we don't have a chance of winning. Zhang Shuzhu's tone suddenly changed, and with a touch of the aura of a powerful army, he said in a deep voice, "We can't beat them, but you did a good job before." At this moment, Shenlin Jun probably thinks that our group is one of the best in the northern frontier, and that we might be on par with them. Therefore, after they took advantage of us with the rain of arrows, they don't dare to come out and fight with us. Team leader, what do you mean by win? A burly man slowly stood up and asked doubtfully, "We can't beat them in a fight. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that they are suspicious of us to retreat and stay here to wait for them to react?" Obviously, this man was a typical person who was frightened by Shenlin Jun's name. As soon as he heard that they were no match for Shenlin Jun, he immediately wanted to retreat. If it weren't for the fact that military orders were absolute, this man would have already started to run away. Therefore, when Zhang Shuzhu tried to boost morale, he took the initiative to stand up and try to persuade Zhang Shuzhu to withdraw the troops. Use your stupid brain and think about it. Shenlin Jun is hiding in the dense forest. They can see us, but we can't see them. Why didn't they take advantage of the long-range attack after they took advantage of us? Instead, why did they stay silent? Yu Dingchen angrily pointed at the burly man and sneered, "With this little ability, you still have the face to say that you are a graduate of the Northern Frontier Academy. I advise you to go back to the furnace as soon as possible. Don't disgrace the Northern Frontier soldiers." Chapter 5:19. Zhang Shuzhu slowly raised his right hand and pressed down Yu Dingchen's hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, that's a good question. If I want to win this war, I have to tell you what our chance of victory is. I also have to tell you why I'm so sure that we can win when I'm sure you're no match for them in a hand-to-hand combat." This time, even the burly man and Yu Dingchen looked at him with curiosity written all over their faces. First of all, although they are indeed elites who are stronger than us, they are still defeated soldiers in essence. If you've been praised as number one in the world for so many years and then suddenly got pulled down from your pedestal, your first reaction would be to fight with your life on the line. But if you can't beat them, you would feel sorry for yourself and feel that you don't deserve the title of number one in the world. If you meet someone who's not weak, you might not be able to win. Right now, the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces were in such a state of mind. Simply put, their confidence had already been shattered. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have this round of arrow rain. In the past, how could the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces put us, who had seen our banners, in their eyes? Second of all, although they seemed to have the upper hand, we didn't lose much of our main force. On the contrary, not long after they were defeated in Wei River City, their connection with the Central Plains was cut off by us. No matter how elite they are, as long as they can't cross the Wei River, they are like rootless duckweeds. Their arrows and rations are getting less and less because there are no lone troops on this plain. They are either hordes of demon beasts or demi-human troops, a large number of auxiliary troops from my southern expedition, or the fallen star army that broke their mentality. Therefore, they can't get any supplies at all. Of course, you may ask me why they don't bully the Shuangjin barbarian. In fact, the answer is very simple. Because the Shuangjin barbarian are now poorer and more miserable than them. At least there are some supplies stored in the Wei River City tunnels for them to maintain. But what can the Shuangjin barbarian eat after their rations and horses? They were so hungry that they wanted to eat people. Thirdly, based on the above situation, Shenlin Jun's reserve force is currently using the tactic of breaking up the entire force and trying to infiltrate all parts of the northern frontier territory. They are waiting for the Shenwu dynasty to use them in the future. However, the northern frontier territory is currently being cleaned up and all the resources have been moved to the hinterland of the northern frontier. The northern frontier prince's mansion is in charge of the distribution of the resources, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is personally escorting them. Therefore, it is a complete joke for them to try to infiltrate the place. Not to mention all kinds of supplies, they might not even be able to find people. That's why the bullsh *T of breaking up into smaller groups and sneaking into other places is just to fool people. They split up into various small groups simply because their main group can't support so many people. They can only be separated and left to fend for themselves. That's why we've only encountered some abandoned remnants. That's why they don't dare to show themselves even now. Zhang Shuzhu stretched out his hand and pointed at the dense forest in front of them. He grinned and said, "What you're facing now isn't the world's number one. It's just a group of defeated and abandoned dregs. Can anyone tell me how we're going to lose against such dregs?" Paw. 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 Zhang Shuzhu stretched out his hand and slapped his face as he spoke. He said coldly, "We can't lose this battle, and we can't lose. Anyway, Zhang Shuzhu, can't afford to lose face like this. I think everyone here can't afford to lose face like this either. Fight to the death. Fight to the death." Zhang Shuzhu's method of mobilizing the troops' morale wasn't brilliant, but it was very clever. Firstly, he directly stated that with their strength, they would definitely be annihilated if they engaged in hand-to-hand combat. This made certain people who were eager to gain merit and disregarded the consequences would have no choice but to obediently stay behind the fortifications and listen to Zhang Shuzhu's arrangements. Secondly, Zhang Shuzhu fully analyzed the situation of the troops opposite them. In an atmosphere of near despair, he forcibly described the reserves of the world's number one army as smelly trash. This allowed them to see the dawn of victory in their despair. Thirdly, Zhang Shuzhu bluntly called the other party dregs. If he lost this battle, wouldn't it mean that their team was even worse than dregs? No one was willing to lose face. Even Zhang Shuzhu, who had lost both his parents and begged from door to door every day when he was young. Zhang Shuzhu, who relied on hundreds of families to survive, couldn't afford to lose face like this. Not only would these people, who had relatives and friends, die in society, but even their relatives and friends would also be unable to raise their heads. Paw. Paw. Hearing the shouts around him, Zhang Shuzhu gently clapped his hands to signal for everyone to be quiet. He smiled and said, "All right, although these dregs have become the first step to our fame, if we want to win this battle, we still have to follow my arrangements. Now, let's bury the pot and cook. Ha! The corner of Yu Dingchen's mouth twitched violently again. What the F***ck is he playing at? First, he stirred up the morale of the troops with a set of twists and turns. This bastard actually didn't take advantage of this time to do anything meaningful. Instead, he wanted the troops to bury the pot and cook, as if everyone had been hungry all this time. I know, you guys don't know why I want you to bury the pot and cook. Actually, I don't want to explain it. Zhang Shuzhu watched the troops begin to prepare, then he smiled and said, but just in case, I advise you guys to use this time to adjust the crossbows and familiarize yourself with the swords. Otherwise, when those guys rush out later, you guys won't even be able to withstand the first round. Those Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers inside don't know when the last time they had a proper meal is. If we cook here, once the aroma spreads out, it would be strange if they obediently watch. Awesome team. After a short moment of silence, a young soldier suddenly yelled out. Even if they were on the plains, they might not be able to beat him, let alone in the dense forest with complicated terrain. These Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers had been on guard for the past 2 days. Zhang Shuzhu really didn't have the confidence to take down this tough bone. After all, they were a group of elite soldiers. If they only relied on the geographical advantage of the dense forest to defend themselves, even if Li Zhongxing and his personal guards came over, there was no way they could win this battle. However, these Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers didn't attack them because they hated the people from the northern frontier. From the very beginning, their goal was to escort this batch of supplies. After all, the transport team of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't something that a group of defeated soldiers could challenge in terms of size and strength. Therefore, the Frost Mirror Cavalry wasn't the only ones who couldn't get supplies. Chapter 520. The supply troops brought back 2 bags of food that were scattered outside the attack range of the forest. They quickly started cooking. However, the rest of the troops didn't chat like they usually did when they were waiting for their meals. Instead, they silently used whetstones to test the sharpness of their weapons. A group of soldiers with strange crossbows were squatting behind the simple fortifications. They were all listening to the movements on the other side of the fortifications. To them, the enemy that attacked first was nothing but prey. Brother Yu, what did your team leader say? Kai Teng, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, turned his head and asked Yu Dingchen. His face was pale from fear. He didn't know who the ambushers in the forest were, but they definitely weren't the Frost Mirror Cavalry. The arrows they used weren't the arrows of the Frost Mirror grassland. Even if the Frost Mirror Cavalry were starving, they wouldn't attack their own people. Our commanders said that there's a group of troublesome enemies hiding in the forest ahead. If we rush in and engage them in hand-to-hand combat, we'll lose without a doubt. Yu Dingchen chewed on the jerky in his hand as he spoke slowly. But their target is our supplies. If we start cooking here, they'll take the risk and rush out of the forest to attack us. At that time, we can rely on the fortifications to kill them one by one. The reason Yu Dingchen was eating jerky wasn't because he had the privilege of an officer. It was because 500 of them, including him, were chosen to be Shenlin Jun's reserve troops. They were the last line of defense near the fortifications. Once that happened, they had to rush out and engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat to buy time and space for the archers behind them to kill the enemy. Then, did your team leader say who the other party was? Kai Ting looked at the jerky in Yu Dingchen's hand and swallowed his saliva as he asked in a low voice. Because Zhang Shuzhu was a meticulous person, he always remembered what his persona was. Even when he was trying to boost morale, he was still using the code words of the Northern Frontier Army. Therefore, from what Kai Ting heard, the mute general was constantly telling his troops unknown numbers, and yet he was still able to stir up everyone's emotions. That was why Kai Ting asked this question out of curiosity. It wasn't that he hadn't thought that the enemy in the forest was the army of the northern region, but Zhang Shuzhu and his men had reacted too quickly. The sentries who had gone into the forest to scout the situation hadn't even come out in a dozen breaths. They had immediately overturned the supply wagons and withstood the first salvo. Keiting did not believe that this was Zhang Shuzhu's prediction. After all, if such an outstanding general was placed in the Shuangjin dynasty, he would at least be a major commander who commanded tens of thousands of cavalry. He would not be a direct subordinate of only 5 people. All of this seemed like a script that the northern frontier had prepared in advance. But after giving it some thought, Keiting felt that this wasn't the case. If the Northern Territory wanted to send people to disguise themselves as other troops to ambush and kill, they would first have to let these people see the other party's armor or identification. Then, while they were charging in, they would also make sure to leave behind some of the more important people among them as witnesses to report back to the Empire. This would infuriate the Reflection Frost dynasty. However, the enemy had no intention of showing up until now. Moreover, the previous attacks had no intention of leaving anyone alive. The only reason they were able to survive the first round of attacks was because of their cultivation and riding skills. After dodging the scythe of the Grim Reaper, they were able to roll and crawl behind the temporary fortifications. Pfft, Yu Dingchen sneered and narrowed his eyes. The Shuangjin dynasty might not have many spies, but that doesn't mean they don't know anything about the Frost Mirror Plains, right? Young clan leader, how many troops do you think there are in the north that can be considered troublesome to deal with? Aside from the Shuangjin dynasty's Blood Liao Knights, the only force that could influence the north was Shenlin Jun. Thinking of this, Keiting's lips trembled. He whispered, "Are you guys crazy? How dare we challenge Shenlin Jun with just the few of us? No wonder your team leaders said that if we fought hand to hand, you would lose without a doubt." At this point, Keiting's expression changed slightly and he continued, "Also, if it really is the Divine Forest Army, your crossbow bolts may not be able to penetrate their armor. Fighting a positional battle is only delaying them a little. If this continues, we will all die." Yu Dingchen shook his head and smiled. "What Shenlin Jun? They are just a bunch of defeated soldiers who have abandoned their armor. Not to mention that their armor might not be useful, even if it could block our arrows, they wouldn't have the guts to wear it." After all, the Divine Forest Army's reserve force had already been crushed by Gao Jie. The group of soldiers who had escaped were already in a state of panic. When the army couldn't afford to feed so many people, not only would they be chased out of the group, even the armor or training uniform that could prove their identity would be taken away. If the defeated soldiers were to flee in the north, they would encounter the Northern Frontier Army sooner or later. If a few powerful characters appeared, it would be easy for them to calculate the movement path of the defeated soldiers based on where they appeared. Then, they would be able to annihilate them. As a precaution, when the defeated soldiers were kicked out of the group, everything that could prove their identity would be taken away. When a tiger lost its claws and teeth, and an elephant lost its skin, these so-called fierce beasts, what was there to be afraid of? At this point, Yu Dingchen raised the jerky in his hand and said with a smile, "There's also this food. After eating it, you'll have to rush out and engage in close combat with the enemy when they're close enough to buy time for the archers behind. I see that you have been staring at it, do you want to eat?" Keiju's expression changed slightly. While he grew up in a harsh environment like the Frost Mirror grassland and was at the pinnacle of the airborne realm, as the young chief of the Green Fish tribe, how much danger could he have encountered? Many years of living like a prince had long since wiped away the courage in Keiju's body, and what little courage he had left was not enough to support his courage to charge out and engage in close combat with the enemy after knowing the identity of the enemy. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, Keiju shook his head very calmly. It was obvious that he had overcome his appetite. They were all elite soldiers, so they carried out orders very quickly. It didn't take long for the aroma of the stewed rice to spread. Not only did it spread to the jungle, but even the simple fortifications had many people drooling. However, everyone knew that the cooking was just to lure the enemy out. At the very least, they had to wait until the upcoming battle was over before they could enjoy the meal. Chapter 521. About 500 miles away from the fortifications. Xiao An, who had tied his long blonde hair behind his head, leaned against a tree trunk next to him and raised his hand to signal for them to stop. Nearly 5,000 tree elves quickly stopped and squatted on the tree trunks, clenching the black composite bows in their hands. Further away, nearly 10,000 soldiers riding various Yao beasts also put on their helmets and faceplates again, clenching their spears and halberds, waiting for Commander Xiao An's next order. They were the demi-human troops under Xiao An's direct command. Although they were not counted as part of the army of the northern frontier, their contribution in this war was not small. Once the war was over, they could quickly get rid of their temporary status and become the first regular army composed of demi-humans in the nominally human-led forces. They would no longer be the slave soldiers and cannon fodder they used to be. For the entire demi-human race, this change was obviously rare and commendable. It was worth it for them to risk their lives for it. Lin Yuan's voice slowly sounded in their minds. 500 miles ahead, a southern expedition is preparing for battle. Quickly move to the battlefield and prepare for support. But remember, this battle does not belong to your troops. Unless your allies are about to be wiped out, you and your subordinates are not allowed to intervene. Yes. Xiao An cupped his hands toward the void in front of him, a touch of excitement appearing on his cold face. Their original mission was to wander between the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment and Eastwood City. They were supposed to kill the reservists of the Divine Forest Army and the exiles of the Frost Mirror Cavalry to ensure that these people would not affect Eastwood City's Great Wall plan. But this time, Lin Yuan personally gave the order, which meant that they could end this boring and tedious work. They could soon enter the battlefield and prove to the human soldiers that their demi-human army was also powerful. Everyone, stay hidden and follow me. Remember, don't attack without my order. Xiao An waved his hand and gave a few instructions to the subordinates around him. Soon, a herald flew out with a flag signal. This war machine composed of more than 10,000 demi-humans was once again in operation. In Shunning City. Ding Zai stood beside Lin Yuan with a smile and said in a deep voice, Lord Dragon King is indeed an ambitious and ruthless man, playing the Shuangjin dynasty and Shenwu dynasty in the palm of your hand. Every move of yours is like a calm chess player, precise, deadly, and elegant. Stop your flattery. Li Zhong, who was sitting on the throne, interrupted Ding Zai's flattery and sneered, I heard that Shanglu Association is very dissatisfied with a subordinate like you who played a good hand so badly. Originally, they wanted to execute you, but seeing that you still worked hard, they sent you on another mission to atone for your crimes. I think your mission isn't to come to the northern frontier to flatter our Dragon King, right? Lin Yuan also coldly glanced at Ding Zai. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was very clear, carrying a bit of warning. Ding Zai's face slightly stiffened. He looked at Li Zhong with some fear, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Shanglu Association was a top faction after all. Their every move was hidden in the inner layer of the world. Even if they were doing something, countless people would use superficial skills to cover it up. If it wasn't for internal members leaking information, outsiders would definitely not know about Shanglu Association's actions. Now that Li Zhong had seen through his disguise so easily, it was obvious that he had received some information in advance. Either the Shifter Emperor Association spies had already infiltrated Shanglu Association, and their status shouldn't be low. Otherwise, they wouldn't know about the higher-ups' opinions on how to deal with him. Or, there were people in Shanglu Association who wished for Ding Zai's death. Before he arrived at the northern frontier, they had already leaked information to the northern frontier, letting Lin Yuan and Li Zhong know that he came with a mission that he had to complete. Because of this, they would have a bad impression of him. At the very least, all the channels of persuasion and flattery to repair the relationship between the two sides were blocked. Is Shanglu Association dissatisfied with this king's division of benefits, or? Lin Yuan finally opened his mouth, and there was some indifference in his tone. He wasn't afraid that Shanglu association would fall out with him. After all, he wasn't strong enough. In this incident, he was only playing the role of cutting the cake. He didn't even eat much of the cake. All he could do was lick the cream on his knife. If Shanglu Association wasn't satisfied with this division of benefits, then they wouldn't be challenging Lin Yuan. Instead, they would be challenging the huge interest group formed by the other top factions. In the face of such a level of power, even if Shanglu Association was a top faction, it was just a building that could be crushed at any time. Ding Zai shook his head lightly and sneered. Dragon King, you are overthinking. Although I am indeed here with a mission, this matter won't affect you or me. In fact, it is an enemy that you have to face. By informing you in advance, I am doing your northern frontier a huge favor. It will prevent you from being overwhelmed. Speaking up to this point, Ding Zai cast a sidelong glance at Li Zhong. The sneer on his face deepened. I originally wanted to repair the relationship between the two sides. After all, I am a vice president of the Association of the Demon the Arch. If I could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon the Arch, then I would have more authority in Shanglu Association. In some decisions, I would naturally be more biased towards the northern frontier. Unfortunately, it seems like I was overthinking. Lin Yuan and Li Zhong both looked at Ding Zai with indifferent expressions. They didn't seem to be moved at all. Among the three people present, which one of them wasn't a demon? If Ding Zai could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon the Arch, he would indeed be biased towards them in Shanglu Association's decisions regarding the northern frontier. However, that was only because with a powerful association of the Demon the Arch, Ding Zai's power would be greater. Both sides were in a relationship of mutual benefit and prosperity. It wasn't like Ding Zai's tone sounded like he was only looking out for the northern frontier. Ahem, then I will be direct. This time, I came to the northern frontier to inform you of the news. It is Lei Chuxing's trump card. Because you, Lin Yuan, had previously led the evil sect members to the south, Lei Chuxing had found a very suitable target to push the blame to. As such, we can no longer intervene. This matter can also be said to be you lifting a rock and smashing it on your own feet. Therefore, before the northern frontier is destroyed and things become completely out of control, we will not directly intervene. Ding Zai cleared his throat. Clearly, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan and Li Zhong didn't have any intention of giving him a way out. With resentment in his heart, Ding Zai didn't even use honorifics. Looking at Lin Yuan and Li Zhong, there was even a hint of pity in his eyes. Don't talk nonsense. Li Zhong's face darkened as he growled in a low voice. Chapter 522. The reason why Lei Chuxing dared to tear the Shenwu dynasty apart is actually very simple. It's because his trump card isn't an army or powerful cultivators. It's because he obtained support that he shouldn't have. With their existence, let alone the Shenwu dynasty, it's not impossible for him to sweep through the world if we don't interfere. The Dragon King is in existence from the ancient demon court. I think in the documents you obtained, there should be something called the Sky Demon recorded. It is the same as the Dragon race and the Kirin race today, an existence from the other side of the Celestial Gate. And unlike the former, these Sky Demons do not have any goodwill towards us. In their eyes, all living things are just food. Lei Chuxing's trump card is that he has a relationship with a terrifying Sky Demon. When necessary, as long as Lei Chuxing can give enough sacrifices, he can summon a group of powerful Sky Demons to fight for him. And during this period of war, countless souls have become sacrifices for Lei Chuxing to please the Sky Demon. In other words, he does not need to make any preparations to pull in the Sky Demon army in the south. After these Sky Demons eat all the living things in the south, they will regain part of their rationality. In this way, Lei Chuxing can command the Sky Demon army through that powerful existence. For example, he can let them bypass the central plains and attack the northern frontier, Frost Mirror, and Xinjiang. Ding Zai shook his head and smiled bitterly. In order to shut our mouths, Lei Chuxing pushed this matter to the evil cult in the south and pointed the reason for the evil cult entering the south to you. Therefore, it is not good for us to interfere. In addition, you are the successor of the demon court, so you naturally have the obligation to deal with these dirty guys. So, Li Zhong digested the information and said with a dark face, because you are afraid of trouble, you decided to let us fight with Lei Chuxing. To put it bluntly, that is indeed the case. Ding Zai put his hands behind his back and said in a deep voice, in our original plan, once Lei Chuxing is forced into a corner, he will naturally summon the Sky Demon Army. At that time, we can legitimately interfere and directly wipe out the Sky Demon and Lei Chuxing. But now, according to the higher-ups, you caused the trouble, so you have to deal with it yourselves. At this point, Ding Zai paused. Seeing that the man and the Sky Demon had no intention of acting up, he continued, of course, we will support them from the outside. The chaos of the Sky Demon can only occur in the Shenwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier is destroyed, or the Sky Demon leave the Shenwu dynasty's territory, we will immediately eliminate them. Ding Zai's meaning was that the life and death of the northern frontier had nothing to do with them. When he finished speaking, Ding Zai had already planned to leave. After all, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong did not give him any face. Right now, he could not wait for the northern frontier to be destroyed, so that he could wash away the humiliation on his body. If you walk out like that, I can guarantee that even if I don't do anything to you, the Upper Deer Association will destroy your soul. Lin Yuan's voice suddenly sounded behind Ding Zai. Ding Zai's movements paused slightly, a layer of cold sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. This was because the term soul dispersing did not belong to the Sky Martial Continent. It was the highest punishment that the top powers would use to deal with their enemies, traitors, and trash. Once someone was included in this list, even their soul would be completely destroyed. Although Lin Yuan could tell from his innate ability to summon the nether realm's black water that there was no underworld in this world, there was still a law that guided the souls and the dead in this world to reincarnate. And from the fact that there were no demons and monsters in this world, this law was much more effective than the so-called underworld. Once the soul was destroyed, it was equivalent to being completely erased from this world. It would be impossible to reincarnate or become a Yin spirit. It was a punishment that was even more severe than death. The Upper Deer Association also benefits from this, so it's not good for us to directly interfere. It doesn't mean that we won't interfere. If you refuse to carry out the mission given by the higher-ups, you will die a horrible death, and even your soul will not be able to escape. Lin Yuan's voice sounded again, like the whispers of a demon from the underworld lying on a human's shoulder. Ding Zai turned around and was about to speak when Lin Yuan interrupted him again. I have the means to deal with the Sky Demon, so I don't need you to provide me with the weapons needed to kill the Sky Demon. But after destroying the Sky Demon's body, my army must have the demon-suppressing weapon to ensure that all the dead Sky Demons will be captured and brought to me. According to the inheritance of the underwater secret realm, the Sky Demon was actually a spiritual body similar to a ghost. They could invade other worlds at will, but they did not have a physical body. They could only use the method of seducing life forms to possess them. Then, they would fulfill the desires of the possessed person and devour the other person's soul. After achieving their goal of taking over the other person's nest, they would become a real threat to the creatures of this world. Of course, the Sky Demon needed time to nourish his body and recover his strength. He could not possess just anyone he saw. Only those with strong resentment, hatred, and other negative emotions would become the target of his seduction. Neutral and peaceful creatures would not be able to sense the existence of the Sky Demon at all. This was an extremely troublesome thing, but it was also extremely easy to deal with. For example, the current citizens of the northern frontier were much happier than before. Naturally, they were in good shape and would not give the Sky Demon any chance to take advantage of them. Thus, in theory, as long as all the creatures in the territory were happy, the sky demon would never breed. However, for the Shinwu dynasty, the continuous battles and hopeless predicament caused the citizens of the Shinwu dynasty to develop a large number of negative emotions. This could be said to be a breeding ground for the sky demon. The most troublesome thing about the sky demon was that they were spiritual bodies. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they would not die. At most, their minds would be injured and they would transform into formless objects to escape. After a period of time, they would possess a new physical body and become a new sky demon warrior. However, it was obvious that not everyone had a way to see and attack spiritual bodies. If they did not have the demon-suppressing weapon developed by the Heavenly Gate Guardian, these sky demon warriors would not be destroyed even if they died 100 times. They would be able to wear down the citizens of the northern frontier. What was even more frightening was that once they fell into a quagmire of war that they could not see any hope of winning, the citizens of the northern frontier would develop all sorts of negative emotions. In the timeline of the Tianwu continent, who knew how many powerful forces had been destroyed because of the sky demon that could not be killed? However, Lin Yuan's nether realm black water could be said to be the nemesis of the sky demon. The more sky demon he pulled in, the more powerful Lin Yuan's natural endowments would be. However, it was obvious that he could not appear anywhere in the northern frontier at any time. It was even more impossible for him to deal with the sky demon army that was attacking from all sides. Chapter 523. This condition is acceptable, but the dear association's ability is limited. We can't equip all your troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Even if we join forces with the other top factions, we can only equip every 5,000 troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Ding Zai spread out his hands and frowned. Lei Chuxing summoning the sky demon army is just a small matter to the entire sky martial continent. The enemy we have to face is even more ferocious, and even if we have extra demon-suppressing artifacts, we can use them to replace the damaged ones at any time. Yes. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. An enemy that could pin down all the top experts of the sky martial continent was indeed terrifying. Even the current Lin Yuan felt a headache when facing the sky demon army, but these top forces had to face opponents that were even more ferocious and powerful than the sky demon. At the same time, they had to deploy a portion of their people to monitor the entire sky martial continent at all times to prevent the enemy from stabbing them in the back. Including the demon-suppressing artifacts and the inherited memories, as well as the information about the world on the other side of the Heaven Gate, they were not created out of thin air. Countless creatures had paid the price of blood to accumulate this information bit by bit. It was also because of this unyielding spirit and sacrifice that the sky martial continent was able to maintain its current prosperous and peaceful appearance. The history of the creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate tens of thousands of years ago had already been sealed in the long river of history by all the top forces. Unless one reached a certain realm or had an ancient inheritance, they would not be able to obtain any information. However, Ding Zai's gaze paused on Lin Yuan for a moment, and his tone became respectful again. You said that you have a way to deal with the sky demon. Do you mean to seal them, or... The sky demon was a large race of creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate. Their fighting strength was not considered strong, and because they had an almost unlimited lifespan, the sky demon's cultivation speed was also abnormally slow. Other than under certain circumstances, if a sky demon wanted to directly affect the material world, they still needed a physical body. The stronger the sky demon, the higher the aptitude of the physical body, and the longer the time needed to recover their strength. However, the sky demon had no qualms about invading the sky martial continent because the cultivators of the sky martial continent did not have the ability to kill them. Even if they managed to find a devil-suppressing artifact that could seal the sky demon's spiritual body, the cultivators of the martial heaven continent could only bury the devil-suppressing artifact in some forbidden areas and then set up all kinds of traps and formations to ensure that no living beings would approach. Releasing the sky demon was just a way to imprison him. These sealed sky demons were still a huge threat because the sky demons could sense each other. Once a sky demon broke through the defenses set up by the cultivators, it would be very easy for the sealed sky demon to be released. Such cases were not rare. You can say that I killed him. Lin Yuan's different-colored eyes curved slightly, like a pair of crescent moons. He said calmly, they will exist in another form, but they will not casually threaten the living beings of the Sky Martial continent. Furthermore, the other sky demon will not be able to find them. Even if they find them, they will be treated as enemies. Was there a better method to deal with the sky demon than the sticks? As long as they dared to face Lin Yuan head-on, however many sky demons there were, they would be able to devour as many sky demons as there were. Lin Yuan's nether realm's black water would become longer and wider because of this. The sky demon that was pulled into the nether realm's black water would not die, but they would become Lin Yuan's most loyal warriors. Even if they encountered their own kind, they would be pulled into the nether realm's black water to accompany them. Then, let's wait and see. Ding Zai bowed slightly to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, we have sealed many sky demon all these years, but we have never been able to completely kill them. In recent years, due to the deaths of some powerful beings and the extinction of their forces, some ancient forbidden areas have already lost control. We suspect that the powerful sky demon that Lei Chuxing contacted is most likely an ancient sky demon that broke out of the seal. Be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, Ding Zai left King Shenning's residence and quickly headed south. Li Zhong walked behind Lin Yuan and asked with a frown, Dragon King, do you think this person's words can be trusted? Li Zhong was born in a poor family, and there were no outstanding cultivators among his ancestors. In addition, all the top forces had joined hands to create an information blockade. If he was not loyal to Lin Yuan, he would never have come into contact with these things. If he came into contact with them, it would mean that the Sky Martial continent was finished. Therefore, Li Zhong would not express his own opinion on this matter, because an outsider was an outsider. Every word he said could affect Lin Yuan to make the wrong decision. Therefore, he could only remind Lin Yuan that Ding Zai was not trustworthy. Even if both sides were using each other, they had to be on guard in advance to avoid falling into the trap of others. 70% true, 30% false. Lin Yuan's smiling eyes returned to normal. He asked, is there any news from the south? Li Zhong nodded slightly. After hesitating for a while, he frowned and said, Qin Yu sent a message saying that a new force has appeared in the south. It seems to be called Jade Lake Immortal Palace. After investigation, it is confirmed that this Jade Lake Immortal Palace has released a kind of immortal elixir called Jade Lake Immortal Elixir. It is said that after persuading, one can leave their physical body and become an immortal. Then the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will provide a new young physical body for the immortal, helping them break free from the shackles of their lifespan. Do you believe it? Lin Yuan's voice contained a bit of a smile, but his expression did not change in the slightest. Li Zhong did not hesitate this time. He shook his head decisively and said in a cold voice, there is no such thing as a free benefit in this world. I heard that the Jade Lake Immortal Palace does not take any benefits and gives the so-called immortal elixir to the cultivators who come to their door for free. Anyone with a bit of brain knows that this is a huge trap. Being able to let cultivators break free from their physical body that was about to decay due to the end of their lifespan and change into a new physical body to move about in the world was something that all cultivators dreamed of. After all, even the Imperial Sky Realm to the Heaven Star Realm could be said to be one step at a time. There were many cultivators who were stuck at a bottleneck and died. Even Beast Lord Kirin, who was said to be at the peak of the mortal world, was like this, not to mention other people with mediocre talent. If one could obtain an immortal lifespan, then there would be more possibilities. Perhaps one could really break into the next realm. But there was such a good thing that could be enjoyed without paying any price. Only those who were about to die and were unwilling to die and those brainless idiots would believe it. Chapter 524. It seems like our Black Jiao Beast King isn't interested in the elixir of immortality. Before Lin Yuan could say anything, a deep voice rang out. In the next moment, a Kirin the size of a small pony with a dark green body appeared in front of Li Zhong. Although it hadn't fully manifested itself, the powerful aura it exuded shocked Li Zhong so much that he couldn't speak. With such an appearance and such strength, there was only one existence in the entire Hingduan mountain range that fit the criteria. The Beast King Kirin, Innerpeace. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he neutralized Kirin's aura. He chuckled and said, "Senior, you have inherited the memories from your bloodline. Naturally, you know better than me what the elixir of immortality is. Why are you teasing a junior like me?" Yao beasts were a race that paid attention to bloodlines. This was because their bloodline didn't only contain power, but also the memories engraved by their ancestors. Once their strength reached a certain level, these memories would awaken. Therefore, true descendants of divine beasts didn't need to worry about cultivation techniques at all. Once they reached a certain level, they would naturally obtain the techniques that belonged to their ancestors. Everyone thought that the Beast King Kirin was stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm because he couldn't find the door. Only a few people knew that if he wanted to, he could break through to the next level at any time. It was just that he didn't do so. According to Lin Yuan's train of thought, the Beast King Kirin's style was more like the main characters in the novels in his previous life. They didn't want to copy the path of their ancestors because it was a path that belonged to others. Even if they walked step by step, they would only reach the peak of their ancestors. It would be a fool's dream to go further. As for the Beast Master Qilin, it was not satisfied with being at the peak of the desolate demon realm. It was ambitious and wanted to carve out a path that belonged to itself. That was why it had been stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm for so long. It was because of its talent and ambition. If it really couldn't do anything, it could still choose to accept the gifts from its ancestors and steadily break through to extend its lifespan. The reason Kirin was choosing the next Beast Master was not because he was dying, but because he had already reached the threshold during his seclusion. Therefore, he could not wait to come out of seclusion and choose the next Beast Master who could continue the inheritance of the Hingduan mountain range. He would then embark on his own path that he did not know the end of. Innerpeace nodded slightly and chuckled. "I don't believe that you are the successor of the demon court, but your soul does not belong to this world. You have the aura of the origin world, but it is not pure. I also know that everything you have today cannot be separated from some special existence." Innerpeace's words were very natural, but Lin Yuan vaguely felt that it had some kind of incredible magical power. That was because Li Zhong's face did not show any surprise when such terrifying news came from its mouth. Suddenly, Lin Yuan had an absurd thought. It seemed that the omnipotent system did not even hear its words. Only you and I can hear what I am going to say next. In order to not be noticed by some special existence, you only need to listen. Don't show anything strange on your face. First of all, I have to congratulate you for successfully deceiving the rules of this world. Other than an extremely special existence like me, or a powerful person who has already deduced your roots, no one will be able to see your origin. That is because the intricate karma on your body has already covered your soul, which is incompatible with this world. But you don't have to be happy because your origin is a hidden danger that must be eliminated for some existence, especially the things on the other side of the divine gate that they mentioned. They will covet you even more because they want to find the origin world even in their dreams. Because you come from the origin world, I will not say any more nonsense. Whether it is me, the inheritance of this world, or the things on the other side of the divine gate, they all come from a place that you know, the chaos. Innerpeace still maintained a calm attitude when it said these words. But Lin Yuan, who heard these words, had to try his best to suppress the excitement in his heart so that he would not show anything strange. The chaos. That was the origin of everything. Any creature from there was an immortal myth. If everything was related to the chaos, then the way back to the past world could indeed be found through the divine gate. The timeline of my ancestors was the first cultivation tribulation of the chaos. The so-called war between the three races was the battle between the dragons, phoenixes, and Kirin. However, the final winner of that war was not the demonic beasts of the three races, nor was it the Luo-ho who appeared out of nowhere. It was the old man, Hongjun. After that war, Hongjun took control of the way of heaven. Nominally, he rewarded and punished all the existences who participated in that cultivation tribulation, but his purpose was just to steal the way of heaven. After Hongjun obtained the great merits and was canonized as a sage, the chaos became his sole authority. The so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address Hongjun as their teacher. Those who did not obey him would never have the chance to become a sage. After that, it was the second cultivation tribulation, which was the war between the shamans and the demons. It started with ancestor sorcerer Gonggong knocking down Mount Buzhou. Then, the 7 sages, including Hongjun, used various means to mend the heavens. After that, the war between the shamans and the demons broke out. But the real purpose was just to deceive the public. We once again shattered the chaos world, mixed our bloodline with the fragments of the world, escaped into the void, and escaped from Hongjun's enslavement. In order to live freely, too many of our ancestors have sacrificed themselves. In the past few years, we have also been hunted down countless times by Hongjun's lackeys. I don't know how our compatriots who have escaped to other places are doing, but the Sky Marshall continent where our race is located can be considered to be in imminent danger. However, the heavenly divination, one of them escaped. Even Hongjun, who stole the heavenly Tao, could not control everything. I don't know when it started, but an unknown force shrouded this world, making it difficult for Hongjun to infiltrate the Tianwu continent. And after these years of reproduction, that unknown force started to act strangely. I couldn't find a result no matter how much I tried. It was until you appeared that I was sure that the force was related to you. Although I don't have any evidence, I can be sure that the force that isolated Hongjun came from the source world. And you are the destined person to face the tribulation. Sooner or later, you will return to the chaos world and push Hongjun down from his throne. Incubus's voice still did not reveal any joy or sadness. Lin Yuan looked at Incubus quietly. He wanted to say something several times but stopped himself. There was no other reason. Incubus's words had a huge impact on him. It was as if all the myths he knew had been overturned. But Incubus's words did not seem to be baseless. Because after Hongjun became a sage, the so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address him as teacher. Chapter 525. The races that once dominated the untainted land did not rise again after the Great War of the Three Races. After the Great War of the Witches and Demons shattered the untainted land, the old forces were almost completely wiped out. Only then did the weak human race become the hegemon, giving rise to a series of subsequent myths and legends. The human race was originally a race created by Nuwa. Strictly speaking, they were inextricably linked to Hongjun. Autumn beans fell. Lin Yuan adjusted his breathing and began to sort out the huge amount of information in Incubus's words. So my system is actually the so-called power of the source world, which is one of the powers that Hongjun has yet to control. If I follow this train of thought, then the third cataclysm of the untainted land, which is the battle between the sages, is also a conspiracy. Is the heaven that the founder of Tong Tian who teaches everyone without discrimination actually the original heavenly Tao? Because the founder of Tong Tian was unwilling to be controlled by Hongjun, the third cataclysm shattered the untainted land, causing the so-called source world to escape with the fragments. And the founder of Tongtian's subordinates were mostly demons, who were basically the remnants of the old forces. Because in the second cataclysm, the witches and demons broke away from Hongjun's control by shattering the untainted land. Even though they were constantly being hunted down by Hongjun, the heavenly Tao that was about to be completely controlled by Hongjun saw the hope of survival. Hiss. If not for the fact that he had to maintain a calm appearance, Lin Yuan would have gasped at this moment. However, the so-called third cataclysm was definitely not something that Incubus and the other demons who had escaped during the second cataclysm knew about. No wonder the science and technology on Earth had developed rapidly. The so-called metaphysics, ghosts and gods had always been listed as feudal superstitions. Even the so-called untainted land was listed as an unverifiable myth. Even the history of Huaxia, which had been passed down for more than 5,000 years, stopped at the Zhou dynasty. Even if everyone knew about the existence of the untainted land, no one could find any evidence. This was the heavenly Tao of the source world. It was erasing Hongjuan's existence, ensuring that Hongjun would not be able to discover the source world. From Lin Yuan's memories of the original world, it seemed that the way of heaven had already done quite well in this aspect. Furthermore, it had even begun to fight against Hongjun and the primordial world. The old forces such as Ravenhill Manor and the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas had actually already established a connection with the source world. However, not many people knew about it, and Lin Yuan, an anomaly from the source world, was one of them. In that case, what exactly was his system? The will of the heavenly Tao of the source world. If he thought about it this way, it did not seem impossible. The system had disguised itself well, and it was indeed no different from the systems in novels. However, it obviously had its own will and judgment, and it seemed that there was nothing it could not do or not know. Other than the reasonable explanation that it was the way of heaven, even an advanced alien civilization was not enough to prove that it was magical. This was because it was not making Lin Yuan stronger or giving Lin Yuan wealth. Its every action could only be explained by miracles. It was molding itself into a powerful god, a god comparable to Hongjun, but it did not want itself to be out of control. Therefore, the system directly labeled the talent of the Nether Realm's black water as dangerous and uncontrollable. If Lin Yuan became stronger through the power of the Nether Realm's black water and became a god who controlled the underworld, then Lin Yuan would no longer be controlled. This was because Lin Yuan was not created by the system. It could not deprive Lin Yuan of his own power. Lin Yuan suddenly thought of the dove snake that had tried to devour the system's power. No wonder the system had changed its usual behavior and destroyed it directly. Based on this information, wasn't Hongjun also a dove snake? However, Hongjun had already succeeded. Out of the 50 great paths, Hongjun had already grasped 4 out of 9. If he controlled the last one, Hongjun would no longer be a saint and would no longer need to hold the title of the Way of Heaven spokesperson. Because at that time, Hongjun would be the Way of Heaven. But why was he the one who was chosen? With his own strength, how could he challenge the legendary mighty Hongjun? Even if he could defeat Hongjun, would the Way of Heaven allow a second Hongjun to appear? At that time, what would be the outcome waiting for him? Complex thoughts appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. It was only at this time that Lin Yuan dared to think like this. Incubus was now using a secret technique to block the system's perception. If it was under normal circumstances, these thoughts that might be the truth would be enough for the system to directly erase Lin Yuan's existence. It seems that you have thought of a lot. That's right, you are a smart guy. It doesn't matter whether you are intentional or not. In any case, you will get the same information. Incubus still had an emotionless expression as it slowly said, I am not telling you this for benefits. I simply do not wish for a situation like Hongjun's to happen. You, Hongjun, and the source world. The 3 of you are in a tripartite situation. Only then will there be room for us remnants of the old era to survive. Otherwise, our fates will be extremely miserable. Incubus's thoughts were very dark, but it was very similar to the experiences of its ancestors. Since the beginning of the primordial age, the best time for these old powers was before the war between the 3 races. Whether it was the heavenly Tao that instigated the war, or Hongjun who later plucked the peach, they all saw clearly that the only one in this world they could truly trust was themselves. Now, the source world had pushed Lin Yuan to compete with Hongjun. If Lin Yuan could have his own strength, then the three parties would form a situation of checks and balances. Only in this situation would they have room to survive. Alright, it has been too long. I should leave. If this continues, it will notice. Incubus lowered its head slightly and said in a low voice, "In short, I do not ask you to remember my feelings. However, in my opinion, Hongjun and the Source World have their own plans. You are just like us, a sacrifice. Only if you live can we live. From now on, your every move must be carefully considered. Don't easily fall into a trap." When its voice fell, Lin Yuan only felt his vision blur. When he regained consciousness, Incubus had already disappeared. Only the worried-looking Li Zhong was standing beside him. "Lord Dragon King, is what it said true?" Li Zhong suddenly asked, causing Lin Yuan to be slightly startled. Could it be that Incubus's secret technique had failed? Did that mean that the system and Li Zhong had heard everything? No, it couldn't be like that. If the system heard these words, there was a 90% chance that the system, which seemed to be the heavenly Tao, would erase his existence. What do you think? Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong strangely and opened his mouth to swindle him. Chapter 526. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace's public offering of the elixir of immortality might not be able to attract the truly top-notch experts, but the vast majority of middle and low-level cultivators will try their luck. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace, in particular, will let those successful immortals appear and speak. This will undoubtedly greatly increase their credibility. In a short period of time, the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will gather a large number of middle and low-level cultivators to shake the entire situation. At this point, Li Zhong smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said bitterly, "The cultivators who take the elixir of immortality will turn into sky demon. They can indeed obtain immortal life, but they will become a sky demon without self. What's the difference between this and direct death?" Li Zhong's words made Lin Yuan let out a long breath of turbid air. Clearly, the previous conversation, which was neither long nor short, was not detected by the system. The effect of the secret technique was still present. What Li Zhong and the system heard was another conversation. What made Lin Yuan most excited was that before the incubus left, it left behind a final sentence. "Although I don't know how you communicated with the origin before, it has no physical body and can only listen to the voices in other people's hearts. Therefore, I used a secret technique to conceal your thoughts. No matter who it is, no one will be able to wantonly detect your thoughts, unless you wanted to hear them." This secret technique that the incubus had paid an unknown price to set up was Lin Yuan's second greatest gain in the past year of being a demon beast. It was comparable to the Nether Realm's black water talent that the dragonization root of unknown origin had brought to Lin Yuan. It doesn't matter. It's just middle and low-level cultivators. The true experts have already seen countless outstanding people fall in the long river of time. They won't believe that the elixir of immortality really exists in this world. Even if it's true, they won't try it. Lin Yuan softly spat out his snake tongue and said with a gloomy gaze, "The world's cultivators seek nothing more than strength and melting, but they can't avoid immortality. However, what they seek is their own immortality, not the immortality given by others." Ah! Li Zhong raised his head in confusion. Death is a very interesting thing. Human warriors like to engage in life and death battles with others, dancing between life and death. This way, they can become even more powerful existences. Fighting with humans, fighting with demonic beasts, they are all pursuing death. They are seeking for a breakthrough in that slim chance of survival. Therefore, what makes cultivators move forward is not cultivation, but death. If they want to pursue immortality, they won't resist the existence of death, because the latter is the best medicine to spur them forward. If immortality can be obtained easily, then what's the point of cultivation? Lin Yuan smiled indifferently and joked, "A bunch of trash who don't know how to cultivate. No matter how many of them there are, they are still trash." Cultivation was a very difficult thing. Without the help of external forces, every realm was a ladder to the heavens. Lin Yuan's own cultivation was like this, and the northern frontier's cultivators under his command were also like this. Lin Yuan had never understood why those who were loyal to him could increase their strength so quickly. For example, Li Zhongxing, as a member of Shen Lin Jun's reserve force, although Li Zhongxing was an outstanding person, he was definitely not a monster. However, ever since he came to the northern frontier, Li Zhongxing had grown rapidly. Now, he had become one of the top generals in the northern frontier, far surpassing those Shen Lin Jun's reserve force who were in the same batch as him. The speed of cultivation could be explained. After all, Lin Yuan was now the largest spiritual item merchant in the Tianwu continent. His subordinates could naturally obtain more and better spiritual items. With the advantage of a huge amount of resources, the northern frontier's cultivators could grow much faster than others. Using spiritual items to increase one's cultivation was not a problem, but spiritual items would not directly increase one's combat strength and combat experience. However, after the northern frontier's cultivators' strength soared, they could quickly grasp the combat strength of their own realm. They were even more powerful than those unorthodox cultivators. There was also the sudden exposure of the northern frontier's aristocratic families and Kong Lezin's secret operation, and the sudden disappearance of the northern frontier's sections. These were all unsolved mysteries in Lin Yuan's heart. Until today, Lin Yuan finally got the answer. Because he had the help of heaven. He had the origin of heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, everything went smoothly, and the speed of his subordinate strength was naturally rapid. After all, the strong enemy he had to face was not the Shenwu dynasty or those top forces, but a saint who had stolen the heavenly Tao. Lin Yuan's own strength could not increase slowly, and the existence of his subordinates naturally could not drag him down. Therefore, the entire northern frontier had the heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, the speed of his growth was not something that ordinary people could compare to. What do you mean? Li Zhong seemed to have just reacted. He looked at Lin Yuan with a respectful expression. Withdraw all the spies in the south. If they want to cause trouble, let them cause trouble. Lin Yuan stretched his body and sneered. Originally, I had to make a trip to the West Sea Dragon Palace to clean up the mess for those evil cultists. However, Lei Chuxing's move to divert the trouble has saved me a lot of trouble. Just wait, those evil cultists are not people who are willing to suffer losses. They have inexplicably taken the blame, and will definitely fight to the death with Lei Chuxing. Our luck is pretty good. It's all thanks to Lord Dragon King's plan. Li Zhong flattered Lin Yuan neither lightly nor heavily. In fact, in his opinion, everything that happened today was calculated by Lin Yuan in advance. It was just that Lei Chuxing and Lin Yuan had schemed against each other, and in the end, neither of them had gained much advantage. However, to the northern frontier, not suffering losses was a victory, because the northern frontier was not the one who had to clean up the mess. In the end, Lin Yuan was still better. He could not figure out why Lin Yuan would attribute all of this to illusory luck. If you want to change the plan, how should we deal with the Frost Mirror Cavalry? Li Zhong saw that Lin Yuan had the intention to leave, so he quickened his pace to catch up with him and asked in a low voice. Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong and chuckled. Zhang Xiuzhu has already started, and those graduates of the Northern Frontier Military Academy will not watch their classmates rise without doing anything. Since they are willing to do this troublesome thing, then let the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shen Lin Jun's reserve troops be the first bones for them to make a name for themselves. Zhang Xiuzhu's move to defeat Shen Lin Jun's reserve troops had actually gone against Lin Yuan's original intention, forcing him to change the plan. Since things had already come to this point, he would not force it. Before he had enough strength, he could only follow the will of the heavens. Now, he only hoped that the Sky Demon Army could give him enough help so that he could get rid of this puppet status as soon as possible. At the very least, he had to have enough strength to wrestle with him before the system reacted, so that he would not have everything taken away from him in an instant. Chapter 527. They're here. Zhang Shizhu, who was half squatting on the ground, slowly stood up and tightened his right hand on the handle of his gun. He then growled, "Prepare for battle." Countless footsteps were heard. It was as if the entire ground was trembling under the charge of an unknown number of enemy troops. He knew that he shouldn't have fought this battle. Shenlin Jun's reserve forces had set up ambushes on the road from the defensive line of Donglin City to the Frost Mirror cavalry camp. There was almost no better situation than this for the entire northern frontier. A few charges and hundreds of lives would have been lost, and they would have been able to return to the defensive line of Donglin City. They would have been able to use the mouths of those Frost Mirror cavalry generals to direct their hatred to the Shenwu dynasty. However, everyone had their own selfish motives. Zhang Shizhu knew very well that this was the biggest opportunity he had so far. As long as he could win this battle, he would be able to make a name for himself. When the punishment from the king's residence at the northern frontier came, he would not be killed no matter what. There were only two possible outcomes. The first would be to lead the army to wipe out the Frost Mirror cavalry and Shenlin Jun's reserve forces that were spreading throughout the northern territory. The second would be to remove him from the southern expedition and have him form a new army to defend the border. He would have to suffer the consequences of not being able to kill the Shuangjin dynasty. Clang! Clang! The elite soldiers behind the fortifications quickly got up and aimed their strange-looking crossbows at the charging enemy troops. They then pulled the trigger. One deadly bolt after another was fired. It took only an instant for nearly 10,000 bolts to take down a large number of enemy troops. As expected, the soldiers from Shenlin Jun's reserve forces removed all identifiable symbols from their bodies and wore only white undergarments. Without armor, there was no way they could have withstood the bolts with just a few layers of cloth and their bodies. Furthermore, the crossbows in their hands were anything but ordinary. Those were repeating crossbows that had been painstakingly researched by the Ministry of Works of the Northern region, capable of firing all 30 bolts stored in the crossbow box within a single second. Even sturdy armor might not have been able to withstand 30 consecutive shots. Even the airborne realm warriors, who were shielding their bodies with spiritual chi, ended up with blood splattering all over their bodies. However, this kind of crossbow could be said to be a single-use item. Without a special method, it was impossible to remove the crossbow case. Forcibly removing the crossbow case would only cause part of the mechanism to self-destruct, and the entire crossbow would be destroyed. On the fierce battlefield, without enough logistical support, the emptied crossbows could only be thrown aside, waiting to be picked up when the battlefield was cleaned up to see if they could be used again. Zhang Shizhu had emptied all the crossbows he had brought with him in the first round of attacks. He did not consider the problem of suppressing the enemy after that. He wanted to deal the greatest blow when the enemy was unprepared. As it turned out, Zhang Shizhu's crazy strategy was indeed successful. After a round of firing, at least 800 of the enemy troops at the front were killed on the spot, and the number of those who were crippled and seriously injured was uncountable. Archers, change your equipment. The shooting position must be used again within 5 breaths. Zhang Shizhu called out. Then, he waved his hand and growled, "Swordsmen and shield bearers, what are you waiting for? Do you have to suffer another round of attacks before you know how to build a second defensive position with shields?" In a team of more than 2,000 people, there was no need for semaphore or heralds. With Zhang Shizhu's cultivation level close to the heaven strength realm, he could make all the soldiers hear his orders with his voice alone. However, Zhang Shizhu's command was not slow. How could the enemy, as the most elite soldiers of the Shenwu dynasty, be easy to deal with? Almost at the same time Zhang Shizhu opened his mouth, a black rain of arrows shot out from the dense forest. Moreover, this attack was an indiscriminate attack. Not only did Zhang Shizhu and the others' defensive position, but even the wounded soldiers lying on the ground outside were also enveloped by this rain of arrows. Between soldiers, relationships were very important. Putting aside the fact that they ate and lived together, if they were injured or killed in battle, having two more brothers would increase their chances of survival. At the very least, they could ensure that their corpses would be sent back to their hometowns and return to their roots. Therefore, the moment he realized that the enemy was attacking, Zhang Xiuzhu originally wanted to order the whole army to press forward and temporarily abandon the defensive position to stay with the wounded soldiers outside. However, the enemy's abnormal attack made Zhang Xiuzhu stunned for a moment. He could only helplessly accept this loss. He waved his long spear and swept away the arrows that were shot at him. He no longer had the leisure to take care of his other comrades. At the same time, Zhang Xiuzhu became more and more certain that this Shenlin Jun reserve army had reached a stage of desperation. Now, other than killing all the enemies and taking away the supplies for a meal, they did not have any other thoughts. They also did not care about the friendship between comrades. They did not have any food or medicine. Therefore, from the beginning, these wounded soldiers were treated as dead people by them. Puff! In the blink of an eye, a sharp arrow shot into Zhang Xiuzhu's shoulder. Zhang Xiuzhu staggered back 2 steps. He glanced at the soldiers who were in a daze and roared, "Swordsmen and shield soldiers, withstand the arrow rain and build a defensive position. Archers, quickly get into position and prepare to counterattack. What the hell are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the enemy to finish shooting?" Before the two sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the archers on both sides usually shot at each other. In fact, who was at a disadvantage and who was at an advantage, actually depended on the shooting accuracy and shooting frequency of the two troops. If they could suppress the enemy behind the defensive fortifications and not dare to show their heads, they could almost achieve 0 casualties and cause a very terrible blow to the enemy. But what were his subordinates doing? Hiding behind the supply wagons and trembling? Strictly speaking, compared to the elite troops of the southern expedition, Shenlin Jun's reserve troops had only practiced a few more times and their general cultivation was higher. However, their battlefield experience was not as good as the soldiers of the southern expedition. However, in this first round of combat, the gap between the two sides immediately became obvious. The reason for this was very complicated. The most obvious reason was that Zhang Xiuzhu lacked reputation and military achievements. Even if Zhang Xiuzhu stirred up the morale of the whole army, he himself was just a team leader of the southern expedition. If it were not for Li Zhongxing's favor, many of the people present would have higher military ranks than Zhang Xiuzhu. Moreover, Zhang Xiuzhu had done almost nothing before except for his good performance in the military academy of the northern frontier. On the other hand, even if the opponent was only a reserve soldier, he was still a reserve soldier of the first army of the Shenwu dynasty. When the two sides met, the gap in confidence between the two sides was obvious. Although the morale of one side was low, there was no way to retreat. They could only fight with all their might. Their morale was indeed good, but they did not have the confidence to win. Therefore, the moment they made a mistake, it was easy to be beaten like an ostrich. Chapter 528. A pair of sharp eagle eyes lit up. Xiaowen quietly watched the battlefield 3 kilometers away, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. This motley crew of southern expedition actually had the guts to challenge Shenlin Jun's reserves. This was something that Xiaowen couldn't figure out. What he couldn't figure out even more was why Zhang Xiuzhu's overconfident behavior could attract the attention of the Dragon King. Dragon King even asked him to personally lead the troops to back up this young general. Furthermore, Dragon King also asked him not to intervene in the battle before the other side completely collapsed. This was to let this guy suffer a big loss, but at the same time, to protect him from death. It seemed that Dragon King intended to put this young general in an important position. Xiaowen's eyes flashed. He reached out and pressed down on the composite bow raised by a guard beside him. He gently shook his head and said, "Now is not the time for us to enter the game. Let's see what other countermeasures he has." He didn't believe that the general favored by the Dragon King was just an embroidered pillow. After all, Lin Yuan's vision had always been good. As long as someone was personally appointed by him to a certain position, they would be able to do their job with ease. Occasionally, they would even be able to create some unexpected surprises. The personal guard helplessly put down the composite bow in his hand and smiled bitterly. Big brother, you saw it too. That troop was beaten so badly that they couldn't even raise their heads in the first round. According to the fighting rhythm of the archers, if they can't organize an effective resistance to suppress the enemy's offensive within 5 minutes, they will all be shot into sieves. Shaoan's troops were almost all of the Tree Elf tribe's demi-human warriors. As Lin Yuan's most proficient archers, the experience of these Tree Elves told them that the friendly forces at the front had completely collapsed. If they couldn't stop the effective resistance in time and suppress the enemy, then they could only find an opportunity to abandon a portion of their troops and retreat. In that case, it would only be a matter of how much they would lose. But if these guys continued to hide there recklessly, once Shen Lin Jun's reserves in the jungle attacked them, they would probably be completely wiped out. Thinking of this, the guard helplessly nudged Xiao An with his shoulder and said, "Big brother, we are all brothers. Tell me, do you have a grudge against that guy who is leading the troops? As long as you nod, we will find an opportunity to kill him with an arrow. It's better than the friendly forces at the front being completely wiped out." Paw! Xiao An slapped the guard on the back of his head and said fiercely, "Dragon King's order, before the friendly forces at the front are completely defeated, not to intervene in the battle situation. Do you want me to violate the order?" Speaking of this, Xiao An paused, and the light in his eyes flickered. He chuckled and said, "Besides, you also know that this troop still has the opportunity to counterattack and even seize the initiative, which means that they haven't completely collapsed. Before that, you stay here obediently and don't act rashly. Otherwise, if the Dragon King is angry, no one will be able to save our heads." The personal guard grimaced and rubbed the back of his head. However, his face was filled with an unconvinced expression. He said in a deep voice, "Then I will see if Big Brother is wrong. However, I will say this first. If I am wrong, I will do whatever Big Brother says in the future. Even if you want me to die, I will not frown. But Big Brother, if you are wrong, you will have to give me a troop and let me lead the troops alone." In his opinion, whether it was stealth or archery, he was better than his big brother. And his big brother's advantage was only that he had joined the Dragon King's service earlier. Towards the Dragon King whom he had never met, he was even more, like a loyal dog. He had no doubt that if the Dragon King wanted his big brother to die, his big brother would not even frown. Even the general in front of him who was beaten to the point of being unable to fight back had a better future than his big brother in his eyes. After all, the northern frontier was surging like a storm. In such a situation, only wild wolves could have a bright future. And a loyal dog like his big brother who only knew how to wag its tail and beg for mercy, other than getting some leftovers, would sooner or later be eaten by the wolves. Xiao An was silent for a moment. His complicated gaze lingered on the guard for a moment before he nodded gently. He was clear about his younger brother's thoughts, but he was even more clear about the Dragon King's temperament. Obediently following the Dragon King, as long as the Dragon King gave him something and did not fight for what he wanted, he could live for a long time and protect the legacy of his bloodline. As for those who disobeyed the Dragon King, even if they could be put in an important position for a while, in the end, they would only end up in a situation where the cunning rabbit was killed and the lackey cooked. He was different from his younger brother, or it could be said that he was different now. Xiao An, who had been captured and enslaved by the humans in the early years, had lost most of his wild nature. Xiao An valued the survival of the entire Tree Elf tribe more than his own future, so he was willing to be a loyal dog. As for his younger brother, although Xiao An did not mind letting him roam his own world, he still needed more training. He did not ask for him to become outstanding, but at least he did not want to bring disaster to the entire tribe. On the other side, Zhang Shuzhu frowned slightly, his face gloomy to the extreme. He was very clear that the enemy's close combat troops were about to approach. If he could not set up an effective firing position, the entire army would be wiped out. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, this defeat would be nailed to the pillar of shame. Not to mention leading an army in the future, even the southern expedition would not tolerate a guy like him who only knew how to talk on paper. I'll say it one last time, prepare to counterattack. Those who disobey will have their entire family wiped out. Zhang Xiaozhu threw away the spear in his hand and rolled away to avoid a cluster of arrows. He then picked up a bow from a corpse. His movements were as quick and violent as a cheetah. He drew his bow and shot 3 arrows in a row. Suddenly, several muffled groans resounded in the jungle. At this moment, Zhang Xiaozhu completely forgot about the demeanor of a scholarly general. He, who did not have any achievements or glory, did not need those superficial things. If he wanted these soldiers to listen to him obediently, he must let them know what fear was, and what the consequences of disobeying orders were. Stop King pretending to be dead. Stand up and counterattack. Otherwise, we will all die here. Yu Dingchen, who was also struggling to resist the rain of arrows, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and picked up a trembling soldier. Then, he swung the sharp blade in his hand and chopped off a big head in an instant. He sneered, "Everyone here knows that I am an Imperial Guard, and you all know that your name and background information have been recorded by us. Do I need to repeat the consequences of disobeying orders?" Chapter 529. Yu Dingchen did not come from a military background, so he was unfamiliar with how to boost morale. He did not know what to do next. However, as the Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, Yu Dingchen's mentality resonated with Zhang Xiaozhu's to a certain extent. Furthermore, he knew that if the situation continued to deteriorate, all of them would die. As such, he immediately cheered himself up and began to supervise Zhang Xiaozhu. There was no need to mention the status of the Imperial Guards and the Demon Emperor's association in the northern frontier. They were ruthless people who could kill an entire family with a single thought. Furthermore, the more they went against such organizations, the more dirt they would dig out, and the more gruesome their deaths would be. More people would be implicated. Now that Li Zhongxing's favorite student had gone all out and the Imperial Guards were helping him, the ostrich-like soldiers could no longer keep up the act. They began to tremble and began to follow Zhang Xiaozhu's orders to build a defensive line and prepare for a counterattack. Coupled with the experts who came out with Zhang Xiaozhu and the Knight General Frost, who had his wounds treated, they were able to rebuild the defensive line in just a few minutes. The two armies began to shoot at each other, fighting for the initiative. While Shenlin Jun's reserve troops had excellent shooting skills, the Southern Expedition's troops were well equipped. After seeing that their enemies were either killed or injured by their arrows, the morale of the Southern Expedition's troops was greatly boosted. They were able to suppress the reserve troops of the Southern Expedition in the jungle. After all, fighting was a physical activity, especially in such a life-and-death battle. If one had 10% of their strength, they would not dare to use only 90%. As such, the rhythm of shooting at each other only lasted for about 10 minutes. Even the airborne realm's soldiers were sweating profusely and panting as they sat on the ground. They no longer had the strength to draw their bows and nock their arrows. This was the time it took for the Southern Expedition soldiers to take turns to shoot at the enemy. Therefore, at this moment, almost 80% of the soldiers had completely lost their strength. Even if the enemy rushed in front of them, they did not have the ability to stand up and fight. As for the Shenlin Jun reserves in the forest, they had not eaten properly for several days, so they did not have much physical strength left. How could they withstand this level of consumption? In this short 10 minutes, the first 3 minutes were still shooting at each other, but in the next 7 minutes, it was almost like the Southern Expedition was crazily shooting arrows into the forest. There was no sound for a long time. Zhang Xiaozhu was silent for a moment before he silently pulled out the arrow from his shoulder. He called for a medic to treat his wound. Feeling the burning pain in his shoulder, He grimaced and roared, "Brothers, do you see this? You guys aren't any worse than those scum. As long as you dare to fight with them, you will realize that dregs will always be dregs, and we are fierce tigers." All the soldiers looked at Zhang Xiuzhu in a daze. No one cheered, and no one echoed. It wasn't just because they didn't have the strength. It was also because Zhang Xiuzhu's decision was to use the lives of their entire families to threaten them into going to war. After all, only one of them would die in battle, and there would even be pensions for their families. However, once this military order was carried out by the imperial guards, the three tribes who feared war would no longer be just empty words. No one would like such a general, even if he led them to a battle that they could not win. No one would think about whether they were wrong, because this was the deep-rooted bad habit of human beings. "Medic, come forward and treat the wounds of our brothers. The rest of you, prepare to eat, then rest and recover your strength. Those who still have strength, come with me to see if there are any wounded soldiers who are still alive. Behead them and let them know the consequences of being our enemy." After the voice fell, Zhang Xiuzhu picked up his long spear again and stepped out of the camp. Although he had long been mentally prepared, he still felt a big difference when he was suddenly treated coldly by his own soldiers. Yu Dingchen sighed softly and quickly caught up with Zhang Xiuzhu. He reached out and patted him on the shoulder, and said in a deep voice, "I remember this saying is from the first lesson of the military academy. Although I am a layman, I don't think you did anything wrong. In that situation, if you gave up on these people and chose to break out, their families would have lost their sons, husbands, and fathers. It would be 100 times worse than now. I believe they will understand you sooner or later." "I know." Zhang Xiuzhu nodded slightly, and his eyes glowed again. He smiled and said, "Thank you for what you did before. If you didn't reveal your identity, they would still have ignored my words." He had long known what it meant to be merciful, not to say that all generals were cruel and bloodthirsty, but a cruel fact that all leaders had to accept. If you didn't have enough strength, background, and reputation to convince your soldiers that as long as they strictly followed your orders, they would be able to obtain the final victory, then, no matter how well you planned and how well you prepared, as long as the enemy found a flaw in your plan, the morale of your soldiers would drop, and they would become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Those famous generals who could devise strategies and determine victory from thousands of miles away did indeed exist. However, they had earned their fame through countless battles. As the soul of an army, they only needed to tell their subordinates that victory was inevitable. Even if all the soldiers on the front lines were killed, the soldiers behind them would think that it was a necessary sacrifice before victory. Then, they would continue to charge forward and fight. The situation is settled. The light in Shaoan's eyes slowly faded, and his eyes returned to their original state. He smiled at the guard beside him. The guard waved his hand in annoyance, but he didn't say anything unpleasant. He didn't understand how the army that had been beaten by the enemy a moment ago, and didn't even dare to fight back, suddenly became fierce and defeated the enemy in the dense forest. "Paw! Paw!" Shaoan reached out and patted the guard's shoulder. He smiled and said, "I will continue to lead people here to clean up the enemy. You lead the cavalry and quickly bypass here. Go to the barracks at the other end of the dense forest and pass down the order. Let them launch a general attack. Be sure to kill all the Frost Mirror cavalry in the camp before sunrise tomorrow. In addition, remember to let them put on Shenlin Jun's reserve armor for the fallen brothers." He paused, and then slowly said, "I know you look down on me, and I'm too lazy to argue with you. I also know you want the opportunity to lead the army alone, and I can give it to you. But I hope you will use your brain more, and think about the consequences before you make a decision. Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for the people in the tribe, for your father, for your brothers and sisters." Chapter 530. After the battle ended, Zhang Xiuzhu didn't press the attack. Instead, he used the excuse of correcting the troops to reject Mount Frost's request to depart immediately. After the battle, Zhang Shuzhu calmed down and thought about many things. The most important point was that the troops that were supposed to ambush them didn't show up at all. However, since they were patrolling nearby, they must have realized that there was a battle going on here. Yet, they didn't help. Obviously, they had received some special orders. Based on this, Zhang Shuzhu quickly realized that Dragon King was watching his every move. Even the casualties of this battle had been sent to the northern frontier through the intelligence agency. Since he had achieved his goal, Zhang Shuzhu didn't forget what his mission was. So, he stopped. It would take time to completely wipe out Mount Frost's cavalry, and he could only try his best to buy as much time as possible. Phew! After letting out a long breath, Zhang Shuzhu put his hands behind his head. His eyes shone with an obscure light. Yu Dingchen, who had changed into a white Kirin uniform, opened the tent flap and walked to Zhang Shuzhu's table. He put a bowl of steaming rice on it and said with a smile, "They said that you've been staying in your tent since you came back. You haven't even eaten. Now that you're the commander-in-chief, you can't fall here before the mission is completed." Zhang Shuzhu looked at the big bowl in front of him and squeezed out a stiff smile. He looked up at Yu Dingchen and asked, "Actually, I don't understand. As a Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, why did you give up the safety of the rear and willingly stay in the southern expedition as a pawn after delivering the order from the northern frontier king?" "Because the southern expedition is short of manpower." Yu Dingchen pulled a chair over and casually sat in front of Zhang Shuzhu. He smiled and said, "I'm a layman in the military, but you're also a spy. Do you know what it means to punish a Qianhu?" That was the most disliked position in the entire embroidered uniform guard, because once a criminal was caught, I would be in charge of interrogating them. If I couldn't get anything out of them, then all the blame would fall on me. Therefore, in order to ensure that I can keep my clothes and my life, I have to resort to any means. I have to be covered in blood every day. At this point, Yu Dingchen smiled and continued, "It's a pity that I managed to get something out of them. The credit belongs to the higher-ups and has nothing to do with me. And the benefits that the families of the prisoners send over also belong to the Nanjing Discipline Commission and have nothing to do with me. I worked hard and got scolded. In the end, I didn't get anything good." Zhang Shuzhu didn't reply. Instead, he focused on eating, but his gaze stopped on Yu Dingchen's face. Yu Dingchen stretched and smiled. "Right now, there's war everywhere in the north. As long as you can risk losing your head and travel to various battlefields to deliver information, even if you're an unorganized spy of the embroidered uniform guard, you'll be promoted to Qianhu after the war is over. Those Qianhu who were originally on the same level as me can even become commanders and personally lead a guard. They'll become people with real power on the northern frontier. Only I am a Qianhu now, and I'll most likely still be a Qianhu after the war is over." As he said this, a hint of loneliness appeared in Yu Dingchen's eyes. To be able to quickly rise from the grassroots to become a Qianhu in the early days of the embroidered uniform guard, there was naturally no problem with Yu Dingchen's ability. It was just that he had offended some people and was assigned to a Qianhu with few benefits. Unless he handled some major case that alarmed the Dragon King, he would never have a chance to make a name for himself in this life. The entire embroidered uniform guard is in operation, and almost everyone has been sent out. That's why I was able to get this opportunity to go to Donglin City to deliver the decree of the king of the northern frontier. But what can this little merit do? That's why I don't want to go back. I want to stay on the southern expedition and continue to play my role in the following battles. When it's time to award merit, I want to be a commander." At this point, Yu Dingchen rubbed the tip of his nose and said with a smile, "I just didn't expect that my first mission after joining the Southern Expedition Army would be to escort supplies with you and encounter such a dangerous situation. That's why I have to thank you. If you hadn't suddenly acted so ruthlessly, all of us would have died here. Then, you can come with me." Zhang Shuzhu swallowed the last grain of rice and looked at Yu Dingchen with shining eyes, as if he was looking at a rare treasure. "Ha! Yu Dingchen raised his eyebrows again and looked at Zhang Shuzhu with a blank expression. Today, Zhang Shuzhu really wasn't a big shot in the southern expedition. Without any merit, even if he had Li Zhongxing's favor, he was just a team leader. Whether it was status or experience, he couldn't compare to a Qinhu of the embroidered uniform guard. But now, Zhang Shuzhu was asking him to follow him with a smile on his face. The king of the northern frontier and Dragon King should know about our every move today. After this battle, whether it's a reward or a punishment, I won't stay on the southern expeditions list anymore. I think the higher-ups will allocate a part of the southern expedition to form a new army for me. I don't know where I'll be assigned to, but I'll most likely replace Marshal Li's current position to build the Great Wall project and guard the border. Since you can't make a name for yourself in the embroidered uniform guard, why don't you transfer to follow me? Zhang Shuzhu put the bowl back on the table and asked with a serious face. Yu Dingchen's expression changed several times. After a while, he slowly raised his eyelids and smiled bitterly. I think you overestimate me. I told you that I'm a complete layman in the military. If you want to entrust me with important tasks, I'm afraid it won't work. Tuck. 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 Zhang Shuzhu tapped his fingertips on the table and stared at Yu Dingchen. He said in a deep voice, "When do you think the embroidered uniform guard and the Association of the Demon Emperor will have a winner? Even if one side doesn't die, at least there should be a male and female side, right?" Yu Dingchen's breathing stopped slightly, and his eyes began to flicker. It wasn't a secret that the two major spy agencies in the northern frontier didn't get along, but other than Sherdong and Luo Su, no one dared to mention it openly. At most, they would fight openly and secretly. Therefore, Zhang Shuzhu's behavior could be described as crazy. If they can't be separated, even if they can be separated by force, the conflict will erupt again. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100 years. Zhang Shuzhu abruptly stood up from his seat and said with a smile, "I've always been bold, so I've decided to be bold again this time. But I need your help, as well as a group of professional spies to carry out this plan for me."